we've got one here. We've got one here. So Naroditsky against Przemysław. I have no idea how to say that. That's a weird name. This was in a title Tuesday from 2023, and yeah, let's see. So, okay, I think this was a King's Indian attack. Okay, Danya just copies and goes for a King's Indian. Very interesting. D4, D6. Oh, okay. Well, I actually used to play this against the Reti myself, and I think it's because a lot of my repertoire, my opening repertoire, has come from watching Danya's videos. Okay, double fianchetto, C5. So, yeah, Iliaos, if you didn't know, yeah, he has, and it is like incredibly tragic. We don't have all the facts yet, so please do not speculate about it. I know a lot of people are very angry about certain things to do with it right now, and I get it, but I feel like positivity is the best sort of thing that we can do. I know, man. It hit me like a truck when I found out. So, okay. C5 trying to open up this diagonal. So I suppose if takes, maybe knight here. Yeah, so knight e4 was the idea. And then that would force c3, apparently. And then dc5, offering a queen trade, winning back the pawn. White is fine, but this does definitely feel uncomfortable. Rest in peace, absolutely. So, okay, bishop b2 from white. cd4, knight d4. It looks very dangerous to me to open this up, but I guess that's why he then played d5 to keep that shut. Kind of like a Grunfeld sort of position with the fianchetto setup and d5, but I suppose black has two central pawns and white only has one. So if white plays something lazy, like, I don't know, knight d2, I assume e5 is quite strong. Then kicks the knight back, maybe knight c6 or e4, knight here, maybe then knight c6. Yeah, that looks quite strong. Yeah, I did hear that they were making a King's Indian course. That would be really good. That would be really good. So, okay. E5 was on the board after c4. Oh, okay, yeah. So that was clearly the idea. So knight back to f3. E4 taking a massive, massive center, which is currently locking this bishop out, but I assume this is going to get traded at some point. This looks quite difficult for black, to be honest, but whoa, e3. What a move. So the engine here wants knight c6 or dc4. So if dc4, knight d2 is strong, but let's say bc4, knight c6, e3, interesting position. But, okay, we have e3, sacrificing the pawn. So f takes is the best move, but I guess because this pawn can't really come into the e4 square, it's quite difficult to play with this. The engine does like it for white, but I guess that's not the point. The point is that it's uncomfortable. So his opponent plays f4, declining the pawn, and I guess just saying, look, I'll pick this pawn up later with some kind of maneuver, right? So dc4, bc4, knight g4. Wow, black is much better. He literally has like two pieces developed, and he's much better. That's crazy. The knight a3, knight f2, queen's under attack. The opponent sacrifices the exchange. I thought queen b6 was like a no-brainer here. What's the problem with queen b6? Why didn't he go for it? So here, okay, let's say queen d2, just defending, or even bishop c3 maybe. Queen c5, knight c6 now is also good. Probably forces something like this, or I guess maybe it's just e3. Maybe that's why he didn't go for it. But knight c6, bc6. I also have no idea what the time situation was, so there's that. But bishop g7, king g7, c5, which is a mistake because of bishop e6, counter-attacking. I guess also up the exchange, c5 is going to fall if c6 is taken. So something like bishop c6, I assume you can trade queens and go rook c8. Engine prefers the immediate rook c8, though. Yeah, I guess that's also fine. And if queen up, then... No, not that. But there is take, queen d4 in this position. Okay, then. So, knight c2, queen f6, just developing, I assume. Queen d6 looks relatively natural, but I guess just kick the queen away. Really just giving this up. Oh, because of the rook in the corner. The knight is, like, barely hanging on. No, rook a c8. Okay, queen d4 was played. Offering a queen trade. Rook fd8, so Daniel wants to trade on his terms, which he does. His king on f6 looks perfectly safe to me. Knight b4 going after the pawn. Rook d2, knight c6. And then, yeah, he's probably going to win back the c-pawn regardless. Engine prefers rook c2. Why? I don't know. I don't see why it makes a difference. But a4, a6, rook c1, rook a2. And then once the knight moves, this pawn is now defended. The knight doesn't really have anywhere to go. This knight feels like it could be getting trapped. Rook a4, knight e5. Okay, knight gets out. I have no idea what the time situation is. I would assume it's getting pretty low on time at this point. I'll see if I can find some games where it has the time included. But yeah, just invests in the passed pawn, rook a5, bishop back. Okay, that's quite nice, just eliminating the knight, winning the pawn. Oh yeah, there must have been a hell of a time scramble to be playing moves like rook e5 check. This was from a title Tuesday, so that does kind of make sense. And then here, I assume he probably just won on time, but this is completely winning for black. So, okay, very interesting. Like a King's Indian versus King's Indian thing. I like that. I like that. I'm just going to edit the title so people know what this stream is. And yeah, if you guys have any suggestions for games that you would like me to analyze, then please do let me know. That would be great. Let's see if I can find some games from maybe earlier in his career. Okay. Here's one. Oh, here's one with him playing the Caro in a classical game in Charlotte, USA. In when was this? 2022? That'd be interesting. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. That will be a good one. A Caro. So obviously you guys know I love the Caro. So, okay. Oh, have I done it right? No, I'm just going to copy paste the... I can't seem to get them to download properly. But I'll just copy paste it. Okay, so this is from a classical game, I think. I mean, the US Chess Masters has to be classical. So, okay. Okay, so, playing against Brian Sebastian Escalante Ramirez. Alright, so, Daniel plays a Caro, d5, ed5. We have an exchange. Okay. Knight e5. Oh, I think this is the apocalypse attack thing. I've seen Hanging Pawns make some videos about this. Really, really weird. So we'll see how Daniel deals with it. So knight c6, which is what I personally play against it. d4, a6, stopping bishop to b5. Yeah, it's a hell of a name for his opponent. c4. Whoa, his opponent blows up the center with c4. e6, which is one of the best moves. Engine slightly prefers knight e5, de5, then e6, but it feels weird to have this pawn just controlling the black position on e5. So I guess I completely understand going for e6 like right now, and a6 is to stop bishop b5. So let's say knight to f6, bishop b5, I would assume is what his opponent would be going for. And after something like bishop d7, knight d7, queen d7, this is fine for black, but I guess white has the bishop pair. I find it interesting that, you know, someone's playing this in an over-the-board classical game against Danya, but okay, e6, knight c6, bc6, and this is a structure that you do get in quite a few Caro positions. Often if the bishop comes to b5 and takes on c6, you'll get this, but often it will be a knight taking. And it's perfectly fine, because if white takes on d5, which his opponent doesn't do, then after cd5, this bishop doesn't look amazing, because both its diagonals are kind of cut off. But let's say bishop d3. This is an isolated pawn, by the way. Bishop d6, castles. Let's say knight e7, knight c3, castles. Then I guess the bishop comes to d7, and we have this 2v1 minority attack thing for black, which probably works rather well. But okay, bishop d3. Here, dc4 is strong? Really? And knight e7, let's say castles, knight f5. Yeah, how do you defend this? Bishop e3? And then bring the bishop to f6? That feels very interesting, because like this c6 pawn should be a weakness, but I don't know if it is or not. But okay. Bishop d6. Castles. Knight e7. Engine prefers queen h4, going for the immediate checkmate, and if g3, queen d4, feels very dangerous. I mean, cd5, you can't take like this because of check picking up the queen. So if takes, you'd have to go e takes, and if rook e1 check, knight e7 is the only move that keeps the advantage for black. Feels very risky. But okay, knight e7 was played, which is inaccurate, but it feels very good. I guess knight to f6, maybe bishop g5 is a bit concerning. Engine like c5, then bishop g5, yeah, so that's the idea. So that's why he puts the knight on e7, so that bishop g5 is of no concern. If it's played here, just castles, and if c5, bishop drops back. And why is this different? I guess because the knight is perfectly fine on e7, whereas on f6 it can be exploited a bit more. And then I suppose black is probably playing for e5 or f6 e5 to liberate. So let's say like knight c3, pawn f6, and then e5, de5, fe5, and then black has this massive center, which white can't really touch. So his opponent does go c5, bishop c7, knight d2. Okay. Engine prefers queen h5, looking for mate. So obviously, if black castles, you just get mated. So the best move is h6, just stopping that. h6 feels risky to me. Let's say like knight c3, because if like castles, can this just be played? Or is that losing? I guess maybe then f5? Is that? Yeah, f5 has to be played. Okay. And then the king has a way out if he really needs it. If check, king f7, check, knight g6, check, king f6, and the black king is fine. So, okay. Knight d2, though. Castles. Knight f3. Then he goes knight g6, which is a very natural move. Engine does kind of prefer f6, but I don't know. f6 feels very strange. Like rook e1, then queen e8. Are we coming to h5? What's the point? Let's see. I guess his bishop can't really develop. Let's say like bishop d2 for the sake of argument. Queen f7. I don't understand the placement of the queen on f7, I have to say. What? g5? Okay, now it wants queen h5, so I don't really understand that. And I suppose Danya probably didn't either. So he goes knight g6, which to me looks like a far more natural move than whatever the engine is suggesting. So rook e1. Rook e1, f6. Oh, he does go for f6. Okay. He does go for f6. I mean, yeah, he was a very strong player. So he finds this f6 idea. Very cool. After queen c2, threatening to win a pawn. Queen e8 defending the knight. Oh, maybe that's the point of queen e8 and queen f7. So the knight can be on g6 and be defended. Okay, h4. I spent like a few minutes just going over random computer lines and then saying, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would anyone play that? And then Daniel just plays the exact ideas. King h8, best move. So if h5, what's the plan? Knight e7, and if this, then queen h5. Am I monetizing this? No, it's not monetized. It's not monetized. There are no ads on. I'm not looking to profit. I started my channel in the first place because I was inspired by Danya's speedrun videos, right? I thought I loved them so much and I watched them for years, and I thought, okay, I'm nowhere near as good as Danya, but I can try and make similar videos for a lower rated audience from a lower rated player's perspective, because I'm obviously not a grandmaster, right? But no, I'm not monetizing this because I'm making this because I spent about 3 hours earlier this morning recording videos, and I was recording videos, and I finished recording, and I was just like, dude, I can't upload that. It doesn't feel right. So yeah, I don't think I'll upload those videos at all. Certainly won't right now. And I thought that this was the best way to, I don't know, still create content for you guys, but it feels right. This feels like the best way to honor Danya. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. But no, this is not monetized. So, okay, Queen e8 is played against h5, and King h8 is played to stop h5, because if something like bishop d7, then h5 can be played, because after knight here and bishop here, King h8, the bishop can come to g6, so there's no time for queen takes h5. So Daniel goes King h8, so that on h5 and knight e7, if bishop takes, it doesn't come with check. So then the queen can take on h5, and the bishop can't come to g6, and it's great, you know? Yeah, I know what you mean, man. It really does feel like we've lost somebody, like, very, very important. Because I know that, I mean, for me, chess is, like, such an important part of my life. And I know it is for a lot of you guys. And for somebody so well-loved and well-liked and respected to just be gone like that, it feels really, really wrong. Really wrong. Fortunately, what is fortunate, and don't get me wrong, this is an incredibly terrible situation, but what is fortunate is that we still have all of his videos. Like, we have his streams, we have his videos. They're not going anywhere. I would assume they will stay there. And we can, and they're there forever. They're there forever. And we can still watch them, we can still enjoy them, we can still learn from the things that he spoke about. And that is a very small consolation. Don't get me wrong, it's such a small consolation, but how much worse would it be if all of his content were wiped? That would be so much worse, in my opinion. I'm not saying that, you know, this is fine or anything. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that we still kind of have him, you know? We still kind of have him. But okay. Back to this. And if you're just joining, I'm analyzing games of Danya. I'm analyzing his games because I feel like that is the best tribute I can give to the man who inspired me to create this channel in the first place. And yeah, he played some amazing chess. So let's enjoy it. So bishop d2 from his opponent. The position is dead equal according to the engine, but I feel like black has a clear plan of e5. Like, it's a clear plan. Now, if he can't make that happen, maybe it's just a draw. You could argue white has a clear plan of a4, b4, and b5, though. So that's also true. So, okay, queen f7. Getting off of the same file as the rook, preparing pawn to e5. h5. Mistake from his opponent. So, here the engine wants bishop g6, queen g6, queen g6, hg6, b4. I guess a4 and b5 is the plan, which I just mentioned. And I suppose maybe e5 is quite hard to execute with the queen and the knight off of the board. But h5, knight e7, h6. Okay, so basically, if bishop h7, it's the same point as before. Queen h5, the bishop gets kicked out, g5, g4, and this attack is very potent. Very, very potent. So his opponent goes h6. Daniel plays the best move, g5. Wow. So if this is taken, bishop h6, rook g8, and g3. Game goes on. This is quite interesting, but Daniel finds the best move of g5, locking this bishop out. h6 may fall anyway, particularly in endgames. That's going to be a massive target. The knight is locked out. The queen is defending h7, so h7 is not a problem. Very bold move. Like f6 earlier and then g5 now. Very bold. In a chess world full of arrogance and disgusting behavior, Daniel was a shining light and beacon of normality. Someone you could point to in our community as an example of what to be. I will miss him. Absolutely. We will all miss him, but his content is still there to be enjoyed, and his games are still here to be enjoyed. So I want to enjoy his games. And so far, this game is this game is a good one. Like, this is a crazy caro. So g5, g3 from his opponent, queen h5, hitting the knight, hitting h6, basically offering up the h7 pawn, because obviously the knight is hanging. So king g2 defending the knight. Daniel's got to be very careful, because if he takes on h6, I assume rook h1, and the game is over. Like, queen moves, rook h7, queen h7, bishop h7, completely lost. So e5, he strikes in the center. Best move. Is that the only move? It's the only move that keeps an advantage for black. e5. What a move. So, what happens if white takes? What happens if white takes? Because you can't really take back because of knight g5. And this is pretty scary. The point is, if white takes, there is not queen h3. No, sorry, not queen h2. Not queen h3. But actually bishop h3. And if the king goes back, you take on f3 with a threat of mate. And if the king goes here, again, you take here, I assume. Or bishop to g4, discovered check first, and then taking the knight. And the h-file remains shut. Scary stuff, though. It is still scary stuff. So let's say bishop g4. Oh, I guess if here, there's actually just a checkmate threat. I was going to say, maybe there's problems with this, but no. That's really dangerous. For intermediate players, his channel is the most educational around. I can see his impact on the style of your videos. I don't want to sell your video, but it's hard to make sense of the accusations of... Oh, yeah. I understand what you're saying, mate, with the Kramnik stuff. I did see the tweet that Kramnik put out, and that's just... I mean, we've kind of come to expect it at this point. It certainly doesn't make it right, but we've come to expect that. We should ignore it. Like, we can't do anything about it. I'm just going to ignore that until more facts come to light. His opponent goes rook h1. Back to the game. Queen back to f7, keeping an eye on h7. Again, in this position, if white takes on h7, then again, bishop to h3, this knight is in a lot of trouble. So, rook h1, queen back to f7, knight e1, pawn e4, locking this bishop out forever, bishop back to e2, and now that this pawn chain has been created, I mean, these bishops are lovely. Let's just go back. Let's go back a few moves. Well, let's go back to the start of the game, actually. Let's keep an eye on this light squared bishop, right? This light squared bishop has spent its life on c8, unable to see this way, unable to see this way, like doing nothing other than just defending the whole game. The rook on a8 hasn't moved yet either, right? You would have thought, oh, maybe rook b8 would be played at some point. No, no. Just launching pawns at his opponent's king, like f6, g5, e6, e5. And eventually, once we get here, this bishop is now an amazing piece. A beautiful piece. So f5, oh my god. He's just going to crash through. So his opponent takes on g5. Danya sacks the pawn to play f5. His king is completely safe. White can't use this diagonal. So his king is completely safe. The pawn on h6 is cutting off White's access on the h-file. So bishop h5 hitting the queen. Knight g6 blocking the attack. I mean, I guess the queen, if it moves, it has to go to e6, which I suppose it probably wants to be on the f-file, I would guess. This is a very cool game. So knight g6. Danya has sacrificed a pawn. Do not forget, he's down a pawn. He's got this awesome pawn center and just trying to mow down the white king. This bishop is yet to make a move, and this rook is yet to make a move. G4 trying to close things up, which makes a lot of sense. Because if you play, like, I don't even know, what, king f1, let's say, and then fg3, you can't take back because of the pin. Even if you could, the bishop's defending, and the position is just falling apart for white. I mean, one of the best moves is f3, just trying to sacrifice this pawn to keep the f-file shut. Like, it's pretty bad. Karo Khan with Daniel's signature King's Indian defense style pawn storm. Literally. He's playing a Karo Khan, but he's playing it like a King's Indian. So g4, and by the way, this is in an over-the-board classical game. Jimmy, I don't know. People are speculating. They can speculate if they want. I'm not going to get involved in that. I would encourage you not to get involved. Wait till the facts come out. Naroditsky introduced and taught me chess. Rest in peace. Absolutely. Like, so many people... For so many people, that was the case. For so many people. The pawn f3 check. He builds the connect 4 with the bishops behind. The f-file supported. The knight may be coming in at the correct moment. King f1. The rook is cut off from the rest of the game. This knight has no safe moves. This bishop, it can take the knight, to be fair, but it can't come back into the game. So a5. Okay, opening this up. Best move. Queen d2. Bishop a6 check. King goes to g1. The king has no safe squares other than the square it's on, being cut off on all sides by its own pieces and these amazing bishops. Queen e6, unpinning the knight. I assume knight f4 is the idea. If this is taken, then queen g4 check. The bishop has to watch the g4 pawn, and then that will lead to checkmate. So knight c2, I assume trying to blockade by coming to e3. So knight to f4, infiltrating. I guess it's a big threat to be taking the bishop. So let's say something like, I don't know, just for the sake of argument, rook e1, knight h5, and if you take that back with the pawn or the rook, then queen g4 will lead to checkmate. Because again, the king has no moves because of the bishops. So bishop f4, rook f4, threatening take, take, and take, I assume. Knight e3, defending the pawn. Rook g8, bringing the final piece into the game. The pieces that didn't move all game are now two of the best pieces in the position. Rook on the g-file, bishop on the open diagonal. Literally every single one of Danya's pieces are incredible. Incredible. Rook h4. Queen h6. Stepping onto, you know, potential discoveries, except the rook is undefended. So let's say white plays a nothing move like rook b1. The threat is to take. If bishop takes, then the rook hangs. If the rook takes, then rook takes. If the bishop takes, then we have mate. If the knight takes, the queen hangs. This is really cool stuff. So queen c1 is played to, I guess, ensure that if Danya sacrifices and the knight has to take, then the queen is defended by the rook. Takes anyway. Oh my god. What is this? This guy, this Brian Sebastián Escalante Ramirez, I pronounced that horribly, I'm sure, is sitting across the board, with the white pieces, trying to defend this, and then is hit by a rucksack. And his king just has no squares. I mean, it's got h1 now, but knight g4, rook g4, sacrifices 2 rooks. If the bishop takes, the rook hangs. If the rook takes, the bishop hangs. Danya is down. This is what happened, by the way. Danya is down 2 whole exchanges. He's down 2 exchanges, but it doesn't matter. The pawn chain with the bishops is way too strong. I didn't even know this game was going to be this good. His opponent carries on with rook g3, trying to block this. He takes the rook. Pawn takes. Pawn f2 check. If the king takes, then there's some kind of checkmate coming with queen h2, king e3, queen g3, king d2, queen d3, king e1, and queen to e2 checkmate. Oh, that's what happened. Wait, is that what happened? Yeah, that's exactly what happened, I think. And his opponent let him do it as well, so fair play. That is a gorgeous game. A double rook sacrifice. Rook g4. Rook g4. Sacrifices 2 exchanges, but it doesn't matter. The white king has no defense, and even sacrificing one of the rooks back isn't enough. Because f2. And the thing is, this isn't easy. Danya either has to play queen h3 or f2, otherwise the position is drawn or better for white. This is not easy. Like, let's say queen g4, it's equal. This position is equal after king f2. Because if this rook gets onto the h-file and the queen gets to h6 or something, this could actually be dangerous. So he finds the move f2 check and finds the continuation. Lovely game. That's a lovely game. That is a beautiful Caro Khan. Double rook sacrifice, pawn storm. That's pretty damn cool. I didn't know this game was going to be that good. I just plucked a random game off of the Chess Tempo website. For those of you joining, I hope that you guys are enjoying this stream. I hope this feels like a fitting tribute to Danya. Yeah, I hope. The fact he wrote a book called Mastering Positional Chess at 14 was a baller move. Did he actually do that? Did he write a book at 14 years old? That's nuts. What was I doing at 14 years old? I don't even know. I think I was just playing like Rainbow Six Siege or something. Such a massive loss for the entire chess world. Yep. I think we're all in a state of shock, really. Still can't believe he's dead. It was the first thing I saw in the morning. It's evening here where I live, and I can't believe it. RIP. Yeah, man. Like, I saw it last night. I'm in England, so I saw it last night. But, yeah. Nuts. Okay, let's find another game. That was an absolute banger. So why don't we instead just take... Why don't we just look at his tournament, that tournament overall, the US Chess Masters 2022. Let's take the previous game. Let's get this. This was played in Charlotte, USA. Siege was goated. Yeah, man. I loved Siege. It's such a good game. Hikaru spoke about the mental strain of being prominent in chess/YouTube. Is that something you have thoughts on? Well, I'm not going to pretend that I'm like anywhere near the level of Danya or Hikaru or Gotham or anyone like that, right? I'm not going to pretend that. I would say it is difficult, kind of, being... I wouldn't say I'm prominent on chess like YouTube or anything. You know, I think that's a massive overstatement. But I feel like there's definitely some pressure to perform, and it feels like you've done something really wrong when you play badly, I would say. I mean, I have had cheating accusations against me. I mean, nowhere near the level that Naroditsky suffered. And yeah, it can suck. It can suck for sure. But I think different people just deal with it differently. I'd say I'm into my philosophy quite a lot. I really like philosophy, and you know, things like philosophy, sport, working out, hanging out with my girlfriend. I've got an amazing girlfriend. Those kinds of things really help to keep me grounded and not so concerned about, you know, drama or anything. But I guess so. I guess I understand what you're saying. Oh, Viv, have you not really seen Danya before? Yep, you've got a lot to catch up on then, man. You got a lot to catch up on. So anyway, let's jump into the next game of the US Chess Masters 2022. So, here, okay, is this a Nimzo Indian? G3, D5, okay, Queen's Gambit declined. Bishop G2, DC4. So he goes for the pawn. This is it's transposed to a Catalan, by the way. So knight F3, C6, and his opponent plays knight E5, the main move, trying to prevent pawn B5 because knight C6, bishop C6, right? So basically, if white gives black some time, let's say he castles, which is a move, after something like B5, if white continues to give black time, let's say bishop G5 or something, then after something like bishop to B7, A6, maybe bringing a knight into B6, black is just going to secure his extra pawn and be much better. Or better, maybe not much better. So that's kind of the point of the Catalan, right? So knight E5, trying to prevent pawn to B5, because if pawn to B5 hanging on to the pawn, then of course takes, and if takes, that's very bad. Maybe just bishop B7 though, or queen B6. It's still better for white though. But okay, we have bishop to B4 check, bishop to D2 blocking, bishop back to E7. What? Oh, right. So if here, then here. That's really cool. And then black is just up a pawn. So now white has to spend time defending the pawn on D4, which gives Danya time to go B5, which is inaccurate. But A4 is not the best move. White has to take on C6. After knight C6, bishop C6, bishop D7, bishop A8, queen A8. Oh, this is classic Danya. Classic. After something like castles, white explodes the center with E5. If this is taken, then I assume bishop H3, F3, knight G4. You can't take because of mate. And then let's say queen to E2. I assume knight takes, and this is very interesting. Again, sacrificing an exchange, but a lot of compensation. A lot of compensation. So, pawn A4 from his opponent, trying to rip apart his pawn structure. Pawn B4, and going, okay, if you want to take this, you can take this, but again, I will be giving up the exchange on A8, and your king is going to suffer. And also, these pawns are taking a lot of space. Levy's first video was covering Danya's Immortal against Hikaru. Oh, really? I did not know that. So bishop B7. Okay, sorry. His opponent took on C4. Grabs back the pawn. Now material is equal. Because remember, he sacrificed the pawn on C4 early on. Bishop E7. Not the best move. Engine prefers this. Giving up C6 to counterattack. And if takes, then again, queen takes. The rook is under attack. And after castles and takes, black has two pieces for the rook. If you're a Catalan player and your opponent plays bishop B4, bishop E7, you know they're booked up. Yeah. I understand the concept of that now. So bishop b7, castles. Now sacrificing the exchange for black doesn't make as much sense because queen a8 won't come with tempo on the rook. So Daniel castles. I guess the question is whether he can keep hold of the pawn on b4 or not, but I assume a5 will come at some point, or his opponent will play it to stop him. So queen c8, defending, maybe trying to go... No, maybe c5 is the idea. Queen f3. Yeah, I think c5 is the idea. And to be fair, it's actually quite hard for white to develop, because this pawn on b4 is stopping the white knight from getting out, and it can't come to d2 because the bishop is in the way. And the bishop is only on d2 because all the way earlier on move 6, Daniel went bishop b4, dragging the bishop to the d2 square, and then retreating, and the bishop is just misplaced. So that's very cool. So castles, a5, queen c8, queen f3, knight bd7, rook c1. Can white win the c6 pawn, I suppose, is the big question. Rook b8. Rook b8, okay. a6, bishop a8. The engine prefers bishop a6. And if queen c6, bishop c6, rook ac8, bishop d7, knight d7. A lot of pressure on the file. And if b3, black dodgeballs up. Black is down a pawn, but the engine quite likes this for black. Will Daniel's game where he beat Caruana with black in the US Championship be included? I don't see why not. Can you send a link to it, please? Can you send that? And I'll happily cover it. So rook b8. Engine considers it a mistake, but the bishop is perfectly fine on this diagonal. Queen e2. Best move from his opponent. His opponent's playing very well, considering he's, you know, just under 2100. And Daniel is a very, very strong grandmaster. So c5. Eventually, this pawn is no longer a target. e4. White takes the center. cd4. Sacrificing the pawn to go bishop f4 with tempo on the rook. e5. A mistake. Engine wants d3. Sacking the pawn. Knight c5 with tempo on the queen. Queen c2. And then taking here, sacrificing the exchange. No. Sorry, what? This. Then after bishop b8, queen b8. Black has a pawn, but is down the exchange. But this knight still can't really develop. That's quite interesting. Okay, so e5, which is a mistake, but the point is after knight e5, queen c1, bishop c1, knight e5. Wait, sorry, did Daniel just sacrifice his queen? Yeah, he's literally just sacrificed his queen. Literally just sacrificed his queen to get a rook and a piece and a pawn. This guy doesn't play dull games. Okay, so bishop f4, pinning the knight to the rook. Pawn d3, counter-attacking the queen. If take, then of course you take. So queen d1. Knight f to d7, supporting the knight, which is supporting the pawn on d3. Daniel has sacked his queen for a rook and a knight. But he has a passed d pawn. So that's currently keeping this queen out the game. So knight d2. Rook b to c8. Trying to go to c2. If white plays a lackadaisical move like h4, then rook c2. And black is almost equal. Almost equal. So rook c1 from his opponent. Rook c6 preparing to double up. So again, if something like h4, rook fc8 I assume, or rook a6 actually is also fine. So rook c6. Bishop c6, bishop e3, going after the pawn on a7. Does I think Daniel wins this game, but I don't know how he's going to do it. So bishop b5, counter-attacking. f4 hitting the knight. Knight c4. Knight c4, bishop c4. The pawn is still defended, keeping this white queen at bay. If black loses this pawn, the game is over. Unless he gets some compensation. So queen c1, hitting the bishop, rook c8. Guys, can we please not speculate in the chat? Please do not speculate in the chat. Do not do it. I don't want that. That's not what this is about. Do not speculate. I will just, like, time you out or something, okay? So, I'll give you a chance, but please leave it. I understand people are confused. I'm also confused. But it is not up to us to be speculating about this. Okay? Not up to us. We will find out the facts. But right now, maybe we should just celebrate the man. Okay? Don't worry, Kai. I know you're not speculating. I know you're not. Don't worry. Okay, so. Bishop h3. Best move from white. Pinning the knight to the rook. Bishop a6. Danya now technically has equal material. He has a rook, a knight, and a pawn for the queen. Again, the main pride of the position is this pawn on d3. The bishop protects the rook hits the queen. The knight is still undefended. Queen a1. Bishop b5, protecting the knight. Queen a7, which is losing because of d2. This can't be taken because of bishop c5, forking the queen and the king. His opponent eventually slips up, and I would assume the time is getting low here. The best move for white is queen a5. Hitting the bishop, hitting the pawn, pressure on the pawn. If a6, defending the bishop. Bishop d7, queen a6. d2 anyway, and if bishop takes, then bishop h3. And this white king could be in a lot of trouble, right? This could be in a lot of trouble. So, queen a7, d2. Again, the bishop can't take. So bishop c5 picking up the queen. So bishop g4, covering the promotion square. Rook c1 check. King g2. Bishop f1 check. Sorry, why would you not just queen? So after bishop d1, rook d1, Danya has a knight, a bishop, and a rook for a queen and a pawn, which should be winning. I mean, his king is completely safe. If, like, check, knight f8 or bishop f8, Engine prefers bishop, but either is fine. Okay, but bishop f1 check, king f2, knight f6. The game is now equal. If white finds bishop d1, sacking the bishop, and going queen e7. Now, you may be asking, which I'm about to ask, why can't you just take this? Well, then knight g4 check, king f3, and then d1 promotes a bishop is checkmate. What on earth is that? What on earth is that? Okay, so queen a8 played, which is losing after bishop f8 covering. Bishop d2. Knight g4 check. Now Danya has a rook, a bishop, and a knight for a queen and a pawn. King f3. The game is still not over. Knight h2 check. King e3. He just doesn't play dull games, does he? Rook c2. The bishop is defended by the knight. The rook is applying pressure. This bishop is fine. Just got to keep watching for bishop takes b4. Now, here, bishop e4 looks winning for white because the bishop should be lost. But there's knight g4 check. If the king comes to f3, there's mate in 6. After h5, sacking the bishop, king h7, and then this is just going to be checkmate. And if e5, trying to give the king a way out, bishop g2 is checkmate. Oh my god. And if the king comes to d4, then rook c4 picks up the bishop. So, knight g... Oh, wait, no, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what his opponent did. So his opponent did go bishop b4, and then the only move, knight g4 check, king f3. And he does go h5. Wait. Sorry, let me just double check that. Have I just made that up? Or did that actually happen? Okay, so the game went rook c2, bishop e4, knight g4, king f3, h5, queen f8, king h7, and his opponent resigned. And his opponent resigned because there is checkmate here, there is checkmate here. So the point is you can't go f5, because while bishop g2 is no longer checkmate because you have an escape square, rook f2 is now checkmate. And if you go e5, rook f2 is no longer checkmate because you have king to e4, but now bishop g2 is still checkmate because the bishop covers. So after king h7, his opponent resigns. What on earth is that? That is nuts. That's a crazy game. That is a crazy game. Okay, well, that is so cool. That is so cool. All right, now, if you guys have any suggestions for games that you would like me to cover, please let me know. Please let me know. Otherwise, I will just pick another game from the same tournament that the previous two games are from, both of which were nuts. Right? Let's just make sure we're all aware of that. The world does feel a little bit colder. Absolutely. Try not to find a crazy game challenge. Literally. Literally. All right. Here's a French defense. The French defense with Naroditsky against the French. Viv. Let's please keep the speculation to a minimum. Or to a 0, ideally. Okay. So here, Danya has the white pieces against Elon Nakar. Elon Nakar? I don't even know what country that would be. But okay, e4, e6, d4, d5, knight d2, the Tarash French. Try double bishop sack game. He covered it, though. Oh, I did actually watch that video. I did watch that video. So, okay, c5. Give me 1 sec, by the way, guys. Give me 1 sec. I'm just going to let people know that we're streaming real quick. One sec. Again, if you guys want certain games analyzed, just put them in the chat. Put them in the chat. Okay. Okay, so c5 from his opponent. Knight g to f3. So I actually used to play these lines myself, but I didn't find them very... I didn't find them very fun, to be honest. But okay, cd4, knight d4. It is heartbreaking news, it is. But I think this is one of the best things we can do to remember him. Bishop b5. No, Viv, don't worry about it, mate. Don't worry about it, mate. Don't worry. Bishop b5. Pinning the knight. Bishop d7. Knight c6. Is that the bet? Yeah, that is the book move. Knight c6, bc6. Bishop back to d3. So I assume black is playing for something like c5, bishop c6 to get the bishop involved. And white, I guess, is... I don't know. Like c3 and then some kind of kingside attack. I know Danya used to really like these open center positions. So I guess that's what he's going for. So queen c7. Queen e2. Queen e2, okay. Knight e7. Castles. Knight g6. Looking for knight to f4, which you don't really want to allow. Knight to f3. Opening up the bishop. So if knight to f4, I assume you take this. And after queen f4, something like ed5, cd5, because the e-pawn is pinned. Then bishop b5. And you don't really want to do this, of course. So rook d8, maybe takes. Rook 81 is stronger. Oh, we're playing for c4 maybe. Is that the idea? I don't know. Very interesting though. The French is full of crazy lines. So anyway, bishop e7, bishop e7, c4, trying to rip open the center. I think this is where they leave theory. de4, bishop e4. So c6 is a bit of a weakness. In all endgames, white should be better because he has this strong block of 3, and black has these weak isolated pawns on the queen side. So f5, bishop back to c2, castles. Knight g5, going after the pawn. Okay. So rook f6, best move, defending the pawn. Rook e1, applying more pressure, just basically stopping e5. They both really like the King's Indian. Well, we know Daniel liked the King's Indian. So c5, okay. I assume trying to open this bishop up, maybe? I would guess. Engine doesn't like it. Knight back to f3. So the knight tickles the pawn, comes back. Maybe it's coming to e5. h6. Stopping bishop g5, I assume. So let's say something like rook e8 was played, which is fine. Knight e5 is the idea. Bishop g5 isn't very good, but only if black finds e5, sacrificing the exchange to go e4, I would assume. And then like knight f4. Oh, okay, that is quite cool. Very hard to see though. So his opponent, which makes sense, doesn't want to allow bishop g5. So he goes h6, h4, rook d8, queen e3. Okay, queen e3 isn't a great move. I would assume h5 is the point. But after knight to f4, bishop f4, queen f4, knight e5, there's no bishop c6. So after bishop back to e8, perhaps he was concerned about his h-pawn. So he goes queen e3, which I assume is played to stop the knight coming to f4. Bishop d6, which I guess is trying to play knight to f4. h5 eventually, forcing knight to f4. But now the knight isn't actually hitting anything other than the pawn. So Daniel goes b4. b4? So if this is taken, c5. Oh, that's awesome. So if takes, the knight hangs. And if queen takes, then queen takes, bishop takes, and bishop f4. The knight hangs. That's such a cool idea. So black would be forced to play knight d5 counterattacking. After cd6, knight e3, black is losing after this. So you have to go queen c2. And then after queen e5, the game goes on. This bishop is really, really bad, though. Maybe the knight comes into g6 later on, but b4 is a crazy move. So after b4, instead of taking, his opponent takes on h5, the best move. Bishop b2, lining the boys up. Rook back to f8. The engine here wants cb4. And after bishop f6, knight f6, black is much better after sacrificing the exchange. But his opponent brings the rook back. Knight to e5, jumping in. b5 slightly stronger. Why? If knight back to f6, knight e5. Maybe the point is that cb4 is now can be played. Although I guess is here, and if queen here, rook ad1, this is a problem. Yeah, that's very difficult. How can we understand his playstyle of sacrificing pawns for advantage? I know, man. It's a very unique playstyle. So, okay. Black brings their bishop back to c8. We have b5, taking more space. If a6, I assume a4 is very strong. Yeah, a4 is very strong. And if this trade occurs, then cb5 is fine, ab5 is also fine. This passed pawn is just going to cause endless problems for black. Black obviously has this extra pawn on this side of the board. That is the worst rectangle I've ever drawn. But it can't do anything. Classic knight on e5 in the French. So knight f6. Knight can't come to d5 anymore, though. Rook a d1. Putting pressure. Best move. Bishop b7. The bishop is now liberated from this pawn wall. And it's actually quite a good piece, but it's an inaccurate move. Because a knight c6, best move. If bishop takes, then queen e6 check. Rook f7. Bishop f6. Bishop f6? What? gf6, bc6, queen c6, queen f5. And the material is equal, but the black king is suffering a lot. Maybe the bishop can work its way in. But I think more so these pawns are just falling. So. Rook d to e8, defending. Best move. Bishop e5. The engine here suggests rook d6, sacking the exchange to go bishop e5. Queen gets kicked back. Rook d1. Queen is kicked to f7. And then bishop d6 and the rook is trapped. Interesting combination. Instead, we have bishop e5, which is perfectly fine, offering a bishop trade. Bishop e5, accepted. Queen e5. Daniel opts for trading the queens. Rook e5 is inaccurate. Knight e5 is stronger. Maybe he didn't like this knight coming to e4. But I guess there's rook d7 there. Maybe he didn't like the bishop coming in. But I guess just taking, if knight takes, then rook here. And if pawn takes, the pawns are rolling. And also this pawn is weak. But rook e5 played. Bishop c6, bc6. And I guess kind of similar to the last game, the question is, can Danya hold on to the c6 pawn? If he can, good chance he can win. If he can't, he might even be losing because he's already down a pawn. He's already sacrificed a pawn here. If he loses this and he goes down 2 pawns, that's going to be rough. But c5 could be quite hard to defend. So rook f7. The best move and the only move to hold on for black is king f7. And after rook here, rook e7, rook a5, rook c8, and this is still very difficult after bishop a4. I guess these pawns are just really split up. So rook f7 played, rook d to e1, applying pressure. Engine prefers rook c5, but he holds off. Rook c7 counter-attacking. Rook e6, rook e6, rook e6. How on earth is this? Okay, this is equal. Ish, if his opponent plays knight e4, which he does. Because if this trade occurs, then this is just going to be a drawn rook endgame. Equal material. So he goes f3, the only move to fight for an advantage. Knight g5, his opponent has to counterattack with king f7. And after rook e5, king f6, rook d5, knight c3. Okay, yeah, this looks horrific for black. The engine says it's holdable, but this looks terrible. Down 2 pawns now. Knight a2. Really? Here? Here? I still think this looks very nice for white, but there's a lot of calculation, and only white can win this upper pawn as well. So knight g5. Rook g6. Best move. Best move. Obviously, the rook was under attack. And he needs to hold on to this pawn. Knight f7. Pawn f4. So the engine wants this. And after knight e5, rook e6, knight c6. Bishop e4, trying to reroute the bishop, maybe. Knight d4. Rook a6. Okay. Equal material, but the knight doesn't really have any good targets. So pawn f4, stopping the knight coming to e5. Knight d8 only move, counter-attacking. I mean, if anything else is played, I mean, let's say king f8, for example, then bishop f5, and if knight d8, I assume bishop here. Yeah, and the black position is terrible. So knight d8, Bishop a4. Engine prefers rook d6. What? And after here, knight d4. I guess maybe maybe Daniel thought this would be too difficult to actually win, which is fair. So bishop a4 holding on to the pawn, keeping more pieces on the board. Knight back to f7. Losing move. Rook e6. King f8. g3. a6. King f2. Bringing the king up. This rook can't really move. The knight has no good squares other than d8. But if the knight goes back to d8, just rook e5. And it's something like knight here. Rook c5. And this, you're just going to lose a piece. So the rook goes to a7, which is losing. And Daniel wins the game on the next move. Can you find the move? I mean, there's two winning moves, but can you find the sexy move, as Daniel would put it? The sexy move is rook e8, and his opponent resigns. After king e8, which is the only move, c7, discovered check, the rook can't block, the king can't go to d8 or d7, because the bishop covers the d7 square, pawn covers d8, king has to move, he promotes, and he wins. So after rook d8 check, his opponent resigns, I would assume. Okay. That was a very interesting line. Well, interesting game, even. Super interesting game. Yeah. Crazy. Crazy. Let's find another one. Let's make sure that we appreciate the chess that he brought. If all of us could play like Danya, chess would be a far more interesting game to play. I wish I could play like that, but I don't have it in me. What happens to all his accounts now? I don't know. I would assume they get passed on to his family. I don't know. Okay, next game. From the same tournament, the 2022 US Masters, which I would assume is a classical tournament. Playing against Donald Johnson, just over 2100. Daniel opens with e4, facing the Sicilian. Okay, this is going to be wild. We already know this is going to be wild. And after d4, cd4, he doesn't even take with a knight. He takes with the queen. Knight f6. Knight c3. Knight c6 hitting the queen. Queen back to d3. Apparently this is called the Chekover variation. But I have actually seen people play this before. I have seen this played before. So e6, I mean, he's clearly trying to get his opponent out of prep, I would assume. So bishop f4, pressure on d6, and trying to induce e5, I would assume. So bishop e7, castle queenside, threatening the d6 pawn. e5 played, so Danya has induced the move e5, leaving a massive hole on the d5 square. Bishop g5, pressure on the knight. Maybe he wants to take the knight, which he actually does. And then he just straight up wins a pawn. Straight up wins a pawn. Which is the best line for black, actually. The better move for black would have been bishop e6. And after bishop f6, queen d6. Queen d6. Rook d6. To go knight d4. And after knight takes d... Sorry. Yeah. After knight takes d4, e takes d4. Knight d5. Bishop e5. Knight c7. King e7. Rook e6. fe6. Knight a8. Rook a8. I guess this is probably a drawn endgame because of the opposite colored bishops. Although white is up a pawn, opposite colored bishops. But his opponent doesn't do that. He doesn't go bishop e6. He castles. Danya wins a pawn. Bishop back to e7. Rook back to d2. Bishop e4. Bishop e5. Take. So black is down a pawn, but the white pawn structure isn't amazing. Bishop e6. King b2. So the engine here prefers take, and take. And if takes, then takes. Danya's up 2 pawns. But maybe he's just thinking that these pawns are not amazing, but that makes sense. So king b2 defending a2. f6, holding on to the e5 pawn. Rook d6. Now a new target has been created where the pawn used to protect the bishop. King f7. Takes, and takes. Daniel is now up 2 pawns, but, you know, these pawns aren't exactly very impressive. Rook f2, c8. Take. Rook b1, offering up the c3 pawn to get rook b7. The king marches up to g6, then king b2 hitting the rook, protecting c2. And after rook c4 hitting this, rook e7. And if bishop g4, rook a7, and if rook takes, then knight h4 is the key move, followed by f3. Okay, that's very cool. But bishop c8 played. Rook e5. Rook e5. If takes, then takes with a fork, and he wins a bunch of pawns. He's up 3 pawns. So his opponent moves the bishop to b7. Best move. Knight h4 check. King f7. Knight f5. What? You still can't take the rook because knight d6 forks everything. Everything. Although it is still interesting after take and take. What, f3 maybe? Or knight e3? White is up 1 pawn, but that's enough. King d... Oh, that's what happened. That's what happened. Okay. So king d6. F3 kicking the bishop. Bishop g6. King c3. How do we convert this? Because normally a bishop is better than a knight with pawns on both sides of the board. White is up a pawn though. So a3, h6, h4, putting some of his pawns on dark squares so the bishop can't target them. Bishop h7, h5. Okay, not putting the pawns on dark squares. It's the best move though. a6, g3, g3. What on earth? a5, a4. Okay, he's putting all the pawns on light squares to be targets for this bishop, but what's the point? Bishop g8, g4, the only winning move. The only winning move, because if he doesn't play that, then what? Let's say, I don't know, he moves the knight. Then bishop d5, and if knight defends, black is actually better. Because these pawns are targets, I assume. So he's got to be careful. g4 is the best move, though. And after bishop e6, knight f5, offering this trade, which looks horrific because of the white pawn structure. But this king has to stay around to stop this pawn. So if something like king d5, king d3, king c5, king c3... What? No, c3, stopping the infiltration, creating a force field against the black king, which is a concept I talk about in endgames a lot. It makes visualization very easy. And then it's something like king d5, engine suggests c4, king c5, and king e4, sacking the pawn, king e5, king b4, king e6 only move, takes, king f7, king moves, takes, a4, and then he's going to promote with check. So what if the king moves to a different square? After takes, a4, f6, a3, f2, a2, promote with check. There is queen f6, and yeah, white's going to round up this last pawn, and queen and 2 pawns is going to beat queen and 0 pawns, particularly with how out of the game the black king is. So knight f5 is the best move. Bishop d5. His opponent doesn't take the knight. Knight g7. Sacrificing the pawn to go g5. Sacrificing another pawn, because if it's taken, the pawn marches. And if bishop e4 covering, knight e6 forking the king and the g5 pawn. And then this is going to be covered. So bishop e4. Knight e8 is the best move. Whoa, knight e8. Wow, okay. So what's the point? If this is taken, h6, the knight's going to come to f6, the bishop's going to be under attack, the pawn is going to be defended. So bishop g6, knight f6 only move. And this is like a big deal, because if Daniel plays the wrong move, he plays knight g7, for example, then g4 and the game is drawn. Knight e6, king d5, knight f8, and white could be losing if he's not careful. These pawns are dangerous. So knight f6 only move. He must have calculated all of this ahead of time. h7, bishop has to sacrifice, and he's going to round up the pawns and go on to win the game with relative ease. And his opponent resigns. Very interesting. So he goes up a pawn early on, but that endgame was not easy. Knight versus bishop particularly is normally quite a hard endgame to convert, particularly with pawns on both sides of the board. Like if you were to show me this position, I'd say, okay, yeah, white is probably better, but converting it, I don't know, maybe 50% of the time. If you ask me to convert this with white against Stockfish, I probably do it 0 out of 100 times. So it is not easy. It's not easy, but very cool game. Okay, let's see if I can find... I'm trying to find more over the board games. Okay, here's another one from the US Open in a semi-Slav, which is an opening I quite like. Oh, Danya's on the white side of it, I think. Okay, this be interesting. Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, so... Okay, his opponent's rated 1300. Okay, maybe let's not do that one. Let's do... Let me find a different one where his opponent is a bit better. Okay, this is good. This is good. All right, let's take this. Carolinas Classic 2022. That's a 14-move game. This is a 31-move game. Okay, that's good. Let's grab that. Trying to find good games for you guys. Oh, no, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, no. Give me a minute. If you've got any suggestions, please put them in the chat. Let me find it. Okay. Okay, here's a Caro Khan game. Here's a Caro game. Let's have a look at this. Danya is on the white side of it. Okay, cool. Cool. My throat is killing me, man. My God. All right, I'm just going to grab a very, very quick snack. I'll be back in like 1 sec. One sec, guys. 1 sec. All right, we're back. We are back. I literally just grabbed like two like plain wraps and just yeah, chommed down two big wraps that didn't really taste of anything, but whatever. All right, so Daniel with the white pieces against the Caro plays the advance. His opponent plays the Botvinnik Carls, which is what I used to play. So knight f3, knight c6, dc5. This is one of the really difficult lines to face with the black pieces. So his opponent goes bishop g4. Daniel plays c3. c3 is a very tricky move. And his opponent knows. What's the point of c3? Well, we're opening up the queen for a start. You can see how there could be potential tactics here, right? You might be asking, why can't black take on e5? Well, knight e5, bishop d1, bishop b5, queen has to block. After something like take, here, check, here, I don't know, here. White is up a bunch of material. So you can't win a pawn. And if you try to take the knight first and go here and then knight takes, that is a line, but after bishop b5, knight c6, excuse me, there is c4, which is really sharp. And this is very hard for black to deal with, because if you take this, you are going to get absolutely mowed down. Like this. So, e6. Bishop e3. Again, can you take this? Because if bishop b5, if here and bishop b5, the king can just move. And, you know, 2 pieces for a queen, that's not bad. True. Except that's not the idea anymore. The idea is queen a4. Using this. Because the bishop can't block anymore. Because the pawn is in the way. And if the knight blocks, then the bishop hangs. And if the queen blocks, bishop b5, pinning the queen to the king, the knight has to block, and then the bishop hangs. Knight e5 is also a move, but just queen g4, white is up a piece. So, his opponent takes on f3. Queen f3, knight e5, bishop b5, knight c6, and knight to d2. c4 is... No, c4 is a move here. Yeah, c4 is a move. I think that this is quite difficult for black to deal with, personally. But Daniel goes knight d2. And you have this interesting, like, 4-on-2 on the queen side. Well, kind of a 4-on-2. More of a 3-on-2, because this pawn can be stopped by the d5 pawn. So it's basically like a 3-on-2. So, knight to f6. Castles. Bishop e7. Queen e2. Queen e2? I mean, when I've faced this with the black pieces previously, I find just launching the pawns to be very scary to play against. But queen e2, I assume trying to launch the f-pawn. Castles, rook a d1. a3 is stronger, but this is interesting. Queen c7, stepping off the d-file. Knight b3. Okay. Rook f to e8. Rook f to e1, e5. Black takes the full center, but can he hold it? Bishop g5. Both knights are under attack. These pawns are very, very unstable. Rook a d8, defending. Bishop c6, queen c6, queen e5, and white is up a pawn. But bishop c5, counter-attacking. Queen f5. Gabibbo, how's it going, mate? Queen f5, putting pressure on the knight. Rook e1, rook e8. So, if black plays something like bishop b6, making sure that the bishop isn't a problem, then after something like bishop b6, gf6... Oh my god, I can't talk. Bishop f6, gf6, this can only be better for white, because these pawns are all weak. So, rook e8. Again, if you take, then there's mate. So, Rook d1, avoiding a rook trade. Bishop back to b6, ensuring the bishop isn't a target. But still, bishop f6, queen f6, queen f6, gf6. Now, the engine thinks that black has to go gf6 immediately, not going for a queen trade, although this is very difficult to play, of course. So, queen f6, Queen f6, gf6, king f1, stopping the infiltration on e2, best move. Rook e5, trying to defend the d5 pawn. Because if Danya, well, for a start, if he takes this, he gets mated as well. So that's also not good. I mean, the only other good move, other than king f1, is knight c1. Because you cannot let the rook into e2. Because, I mean, all things being equal, this structure is horrific. Basically. So endgames will just favor white. So king f1, rook e5, knight back to d2. Knight back to d2, what's the point of that? Knight f3, sure. King e2. Okay, so he gets the e-file for the king, that makes sense. King e7, h3. Expanding with g3, just taking a bit more space. Rook h5, h4. Rook h6, oh, that's a very passive move. Knight e1. The engine here likes knight d4 because it thinks that this endgame is completely winning for white, but it is tough to trade into a rook endgame, particularly with equal pawns, but these pawns are not very impressive, and nor is this rook. So he goes knight e1 though. f5, trying to open up the position. Knight f... Did the knight just come from f3? Yeah, it did. So the knight jumps between e1 and f3. If this is played, now I guess the point is g4, because h4 is now protected. I would guess that's why he brought the knight back. So f6, stopping any knight hops. Knight back to e1 again, which is a mistake because of f4, which his opponent does play. Better is either knight d4, going for the endgame, or, which again is difficult to say, or a4, and after f4, g4, which to me looks like it makes a lot of sense, but let's let the sensei do his thing. So knight e1, f4, knight g2, fg3, knight f4 check, and then king f3. Whoa, that's the only winning move. Oh, so if fg3 does king g4, counterattacking, right? And then rook d3, but king f3, sacking the pawn because of mate. What a checkmate. Look at that. That is cool. So black goes d4, which is the only move to try and keep the rook out. After fg3, you can't take because of mate. So king e5, now b4. If this is taken, rook d5 is still checkmate. So f5 giving the king a way out. Now c4. This is a passed pawn, but it can't really move. Rook c6, c5, kicking the bishop away. Rook e1 forcing the king away. Rook e8 attacking. If bishop here, then I assume knight d5 ends the game. The bishop is going to be lost. So that's what happens, actually. King e6, knight e7, rook c7, knight c8 with discovered check into d6. And here I think black can probably resign. He plays another move, but after rook e5, he resigns. That is cool. King f3 is a gangster move. Gangster move. Threatening checkmate. I mean, let's say black takes on h4. It's still a checkmate. Like, black played the only move, which is pawn d4. The only try. Yeah. And if that resource doesn't exist, white is still better. After rook d3, f5, knight d5, white can still go up a pawn, but there's a lot of chess still to be played. This could very easily be a draw. You know, if these pieces come off the board, the rook endgame could very easily be drawn, particularly with how active this king is. But yeah, that was a very, very cool game. Very cool game. And yeah, the knight dominates the bishop in this endgame. Although I think black did a very good job of trading off this f-pawn. I think he did a very good job of finding this idea at the right moment. But okay. Okay, let's find another game. Let's find another game. What's this? An Italian. It's an Italian. It's a Spanish. What's this? Nah, okay, let's go for an Italian game. Let's see. So these were actually played online. But that was because it was 2021, and we all know what happened in 2021. But it was part of the US Chess Masters, so it still would have been played in like a classical time format, I would have thought. So, okay. Daniel has the black pieces and plays e4, e5. One of his best games was versus Isan Suarez. Let me see if I can find that. Let me see if I can find that. I think I found it. I think this is it. Let me see if I can get that over. We can put a pin in this one. We can always come back to this. Okay. Okay, I think this is it. Okay. So I'm expecting fireworks. I'm expecting fireworks. Okay. Hi Tessa. Hi. Good to have you here. I hope you enjoy the stream, and yeah, I think that this is a good way to try to remember him, and may he indeed rest in peace. So d4, d5. He goes for what? Is he going for a Jabava? He's going for a Jabava. A Jabava London against a 25-50. Let's see what he can come up with. e6, knight b5, knight a6. Florian, can you attach a link? e3, bishop e7, knight to f3. I would assume this is all theory. Castles. Guy is very excited. a3. a3 is interesting. Just trying to do what? Wait, what's the point of that? I have literally no idea. What's the point of a3? Oh, maybe he's preparing c4. And he doesn't want any checks. Ah, maybe that's the point. So knight h5, chasing the bishop. Very classic Jabava sort of thing. Bishop e5, trying to induce the move f6, which he does. Now after bishop g3, black can take, but it's a bit risky. You know, bishop d3, I would assume, is kind of dangerous. So we have c5, c4, blowing up the center. And I guess the point of a3 is to stop bishop to b4 ideas. g6, bishop to d3, setting things up. Again, if this is taken, then h takes, and that could be rather dangerous. So cd4, ed4, knight back to b8. Strange move, but the point is, if you go knight c7, I assume knight g3, and have to take and take, black is obviously up a piece. So maybe he wants to reroute to c6. Daniel castles, knight c6. Now taking isn't as big of a deal, because there's no open h-file for the rook, although maybe f takes is nice with the open f-file. I don't know. Rook e1. Now knight g3, hg3. Let me just see. If black takes now, is f takes better? No, still h takes is better. Okay, yeah, sure. So knight c6, rook e1. Yeah, he always seemed like a lovely guy. And I think that's what drew so many of us to him. So knight g3, hg3, rook f7. And I mean, inducing this move f6 with the move bishop e5, it's kind of like a French type structure almost. Yeah, although normally you'd have an e-pawn to trade off on f6. So okay, knight back to c3, applying pressure. Bishop back to f8. Pawn b4, taking some space on the queen side. By the way, if this is taken, then after bishop c4, e6 is just problematic. So knight back to e7, trying to hold on to d5. Queen b3, applying more pressure. King g7, getting off of this very scary diagonal. Rook e2, I assume doubling up. Bishop d7, rook a to e1. Rook c8, applying pressure. And c5. c5. So the target is no longer d5, I guess. But there's pressure on e6. Maybe there's an exchange sack at the correct moment. And I assume he's investing in his queenside pawns. So g5. Yep. There's the exchange sack. I promise you I didn't see that. Promise you. So rook e6. He sacks the rook. Bishop e6, rook e6. Oh, I guess this is why this game was recommended. That makes sense. That makes sense. All right. Whoops. Okay, yeah. So a6 bishop back to b1. Maybe setting up a battery. Rook c6 offering a rook trade. He sacks the second rook. So he sacks the first rook for a pawn and a bishop, which seemed quite natural. A great move, but seemed rather natural to me. But then after rook c6, he sacks the second rook. And after queen e7, knight d5, hitting the queen. There's no queen to e1, the knight covers. Queen e6, trying to pin the knight to the white queen. The white queen goes to d3, sacrificing the knight because of mate in 1. Of course, his opponent doesn't fall for that. King back to h8, ensuring the rook is defending h7. Knight back to e3, preparing pawn to d5 with a very nasty fork. So rook back to c8, d5 anyway. Bishop back to d7. Yeah, Danya clearly wasn't fond of rooks. And so basically, Danya has 2 knights and a pawn for 2 rooks. No, 2 knights and 2 pawns for 2 rooks. Except the 2 pawns that he is up are monsters. And these 2 knights, well, this knight isn't very impressive, but it could be. This knight is very nice. So d6, shutting this bishop out of the game completely. His opponent sacrifices the bishop to try and get back into the game. Rook c1 check, king h2. He sacks it. What is going on? So Danya is sacked a rook for a bishop, then a rook for a knight. Then his opponent sacks a bishop for a pawn. Then he sacks a rook for a bishop and a pawn. And now after knight f5, we have 2 glorious knights versus a not so glorious rook. Queen e6, queen d3. What's the threat? Because, I mean... Oh, no, the threat is literally just check. Right, okay, yeah, sure. Because the king can't come here. So h5. Now, if a check is given, the king has the h7 square to run to. So knight 3 to d4. The knights are supporting each other, and they're both glorious. So queen e5. Knight h6, best move. Hitting the rook. Maybe this queen will come in, but I would expect the d knight is coming to f5. That would be my guess. Rook f8, yeah, knight d to f5. Now look at the squares these knights cover. These are all very dangerous squares. Queen e6, queen f3, pressuring the h5 pawn. Very calm move, but also pressuring b7, queen b7. And there's checkmate threatened. How do you stop checkmate? Well, if you go rook to g8, then knight to f7, king h7, knight g5 double check, king g6, queen h7, king up, check here, and then knight h6 is mate. Yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this. Because Danya played some incredible chess, and I think that, you know, although he has passed, we should appreciate it. So queen b7, his opponent tries queen g6, covering the checkmate. But after queen e7, his opponent resigns. The 2 knights are too powerful. The king has no safe moves. The queen needs to keep an eye on the g7 square. The rook is hanging. Where does the rook go? If rook to b8, knight to f7 check. If the king goes to g8, then knight 5 to h6, forcing the king to step up. And then I think the most simple win is just knight to e5 with discovered check. And after here. There's probably ways to mate black, but this would be a very simple way to win the game because it's just a queen versus a rook, and that's about it. So, yeah, after the move... where was it? After queen g6, queen g6, queen e7, his opponent resigns. Very interesting game. Let's just go over it quickly. So where were the highlights? So here we have the first sacrifice, a rook for a bishop and a pawn. Then we have the second sacrifice, a rook for a knight and a pawn. Then queen d3, sacrificing a knight, but you can't take it because of mate, and black is a very strong player. So he sees that. And then it's black's turn. Black sacks a bishop for a pawn, and then a rook for a bishop and a pawn, but it's not enough. The two knights are too powerful, and they march into the black position. The white queen does a dance, there's too many threats, and black has to throw in the towel. Those are some pretty incredible knights. All right, next game. Let's keep this going. This is from the Chess Masters 2021, which I think was played online because it was in 2021. But nonetheless, Danya playing the black side of an Italian. Bishop c4, knight f6, the two knights. You'll all know the fried liver with knight to g5, of course, but they don't play that at that level. Although they sometimes do. But pawn d3, pawn h6, stopping anything coming to g5. Pawn c3, preparing pawn to d4 ideas at the correct moment. Pawn d6, normal move, just opening up the light square bishop. Bishop b3, pawn g... Dude, what is with this man? Pawn g5. This is a serious game. And he's just going pawn g5 in the middle of everything. Okay, it's the best move, though. And knight after d2 is a mistake. On move 7 of the Italian? Whoa. So bishop g7, being catoing. Engine prefers d5. And if take, I guess the knight is just going to plonk itself on f4. And that's going to be a problem. And if knight e4, now if knight here, I assume takes. So bishop e6, maybe f5 is coming. I don't know, that's nuts. So bishop g7 though, chill. Knight f1, d5 played, knight bd2. Again, I assume if takes and knight takes, the knight is just too active, basically. g5 before white even castle is wild. Exactly. I mean, white doesn't even have to castle kingside. Yeah, it's nuts. So, how can you play this kind of chess at this level, by the way? I can't even get away with it in my online blitz games. So, okay, knight g3, looking at the f5 square, I assume. Queen e7, queen e2, castle queen... Okay, castle queenside. All right. Knight d to f1. White is shuffling, but it's a bit slow. Engine wants the immediate castles, and then after h, you've got to survive this though. That I don't know how white survives that like with confidence. So knight d to f1, queen d7. Maybe bishop g4 is on the way. Bishop a4, pinning the knight to the queen. d4. If takes, which didn't happen, then e takes or queen takes. Queen takes looks more natural to me because d3 looks like a massive target, but I guess it does give this. So there's also e takes, and that also stops the knight from coming to e3. If the knight comes to f5, then I assume take and rook e8 ends the game. And you see the power of the pawn here stopping anything coming to e3. So c4. His opponent shuts the position down. Queen d6, unpinning the knight. Bishop back to d1. Look how passive white is. I mean, he only has one piece that I would say is developed. I wouldn't say this queen is developed. And his king can't castle. The knight e7. I would assume this is the idea. Queen c2. Knight g6. Knight h5, offering a trade. Knight h5, bishop h5, slightly inaccurate, but g4, trying to cut the bishop off from home. If the bishop takes on g6, after fg6, the f file opens up. And let's say white, I don't know, plays knight g3, for example. h5, h4 is going to be a big problem. So g3 from white. Engine hates it. What's the point of g3? Is it to stop knight here? Let's say knight g3 is played. Are you trying to stop this? Engine prefers knight f4. And if take and knight f5, this is still very dangerous after the check is given. Because the thing is, it's opposite color bishops, but there's still all the major pieces on the board, which normally favors the attacking side. And I mean, black is clearly the only side anywhere near attacking in this position. So pawn g3, trying to control the movement of this knight. Knight back to f8. So now this bishop can't trade itself off. It has no way back home. Queen e2, trying to liberate the bishop. Queen d7, defending the g4 pawn, stopping the bishop from getting out. Pawn h3, desperately trying to liberate the bishop, and here Danya has to let it out. But he wins a pawn in the process. Pawn g4 from white, trying to win back the pawn. Knight g6. If takes, then... Well, I don't really know what the point is. The engine suggests king b8, which I don't really understand. Also likes bishop f8 or bishop f6. And after f3, king b8, knight g3, bishop g5. Let's say trades occur. Oh, then knight to f... Oh, right, you can't trade off the dark square bishops because knight f5 will happen. So if you are going to do that, you've got to take here first. And after fg6, bishop g5, hg5, let's say rook here, castle, queenside. White can try and hold this. Something like here, rook h2 ends the game. That's quite cool because of the deflection. So bishop f6 from Danya. So yeah, knight g3, bishop f6. So he's looking for the bishop trade so that he can put the knight on f4. And if he achieves that, he's winning. So f3, bishop g5. Here his opponent does do it, but he then very quickly takes on g6 to eliminate the knight. If you don't eliminate the knight is coming to f5 and you can resign. This bishop is horrific. The knight is glorious. Just for an example, let's say rook h2, knight f4, queen c2. Everything is technically defended, but you just can't move. And if this knight comes in, I assume immediately it is taken. So let's even just say, I don't know, king b8, for example. If knight f5, okay, here there's this, but there's also just this. And if like e takes, black can win a lot of material. Even if black doesn't take it, like, let's just say f6 for the sake of argument, and the bishop is on g6 and technically safe. Black is up a pawn, but more than that, like, white just has no moves, and this knight is the greatest piece you've ever seen, and this bishop can't see anything. So you have to take the knight, basically. You have to take it. You can't let it get into f4. So take, castle. Yeah, it's the best move, but h2 check, king g2. If white can scoop up this pawn, he may be able to survive. But after rook d to f8, rook f2, if rook to h1 is played, then queen h7, queen h3 is on the way, and probably bishop g4 will end the game. So let's say, I don't even know. Like, the engine suggests rook h to f1, queen h3. If the king goes here, then this will probably end the game. And if the king goes to h1, then the knight will just hang. All these opponents lack space. True. I guess Danya just squeezed his opponents. So rook f2, rook f4, setting up sacrifice ideas maybe, or potentially doubling up. Rook a to f1, queen f7, doubling up on the f file. Again, maybe ideas on g4. Queen e1, b6. b6 is a great move, stopping the queen from trying to counterattack. Queen back to e2. White is just shuffling. And that's a great sign for Danya, because he can kind of take his time. King b7, taking his time. Queen e1, a5, taking his time. b3, rook h4. Now maybe there's some kind of sacrifice looming. Dude, I genuinely haven't specifically picked these games because they're exciting. I've just picked random games of his from his chess tempo profile, and they're just all nuts. So, and he's playing these in classical games as well. So queen e2, queen d7, putting a lot of pressure on g4. Don't forget about h2, by the way. The knight needs to keep an eye on that h1 square. Rook h1, trying to get the pawn. Queen h7 defending. No h-pawn for white. Knight back to f1, trying to win the pawn. And now he sacks the rook. Engine prefers bishop takes, but rook takes is also completely valid. Forcing f takes. Rook g4 check. The king, I mean, what does the king even do? I mean, here, white sacrifices the queen, which is the only move. If knight g3, there's rook g3. And if king g3, then queen h3 is checkmate. Black is down 2 rooks for a bishop, but it doesn't even matter. That's kind of crazy. So white sacks the queen. Bishop takes g4. The game is not over. If this h-pawn falls, maybe white can survive. You know? 2 rooks versus a queen. Bishop versus a knight. Maybe he can survive. But rook h2. Bishop h5. Very calm move to self-pin like that. But Daniel goes for it. Knight g3, hitting the bishop. Queen d7, maybe trying to infiltrate. Rook h1. So if knight h5, gh5, if this is taken, then queen here will pick up the rook. And if you don't take, then these pawns are going to be a problem. So rook back to h1. Pawn a4, trying to create more weaknesses. Engine prefers bishop g4, but okay. Rook h to f1, doubling up on the f file. Bishop to g4. Threatening bishop h3 stuff. Yeah, I wish I could play like Danya, but like, yeah, it's just not going to happen. I've tried. It's not going to happen. The rook f7, pressure on the queen. Bishop h3, check. King to h2. The queen is hanging, so is the rook. The queen has to move. Now, the rook gets out. Sorry, his opponent resigns here. What? His opponent resigns. If the rook moves, queen h4. Queen h4 and the game is over. If you don't do anything, bishop here, and that's game over. If you move the rook to get out of danger, like rook to f6, so that bishop can't attack the rook with discovered check. Bishop g4, discovered check. King g2, keeping an eye on the knight. Queen h3, forcing the king away from the knight. And then black has a queen and a bishop for 2 rooks. That's really cool. That's really cool. Exposing just how weak the white king is. Yeah, queen h4. And that's game. That came out of nowhere. That was a crazy attack again. Just sacrificing material as he does. Now, I do need to mention that earlier here, so when he does sacrifice the rook, the engine actually prefers bishop takes g4. And, I mean, you have to take this, right? So f takes. Rook f takes g4. Knight g3. But here, queen h5 is the move. Why? Let's say rook f3 defending. What's the point? Rook h3. Oh, right, okay. So I guess the problem is that this queen could be hanging at the end of some lines. So if queen back to e1, getting out of the way, queen h4. Okay, white literally can't move. Can shuffle the queen maybe. Rook f4. If you take this, g takes, knight moves somewhere. Let's say back to e2. And then queen g4 check, king moves, and then anything wins, but rook f3 is probably the easiest, just winning the queen. I can see why he took with the rook now, because this is probably easier calculation. Because it's simple. You can't block, because take and mate. So I guess that was the consideration that he made, which makes an awful lot of sense. Awful lot of sense. Okay, then. I need a drink. My throat is killing. Killing. But we are seeing great game after great game here. Great game after great game, so I cannot complain. Alright, we have another Italian game here, with Danya on the black side again. Wait, is this the same game? Sorry, I think that's... Oh, no. I lost it. No, that was the same game. Give me a second. Okay. No, not that one. Title Tuesday. Classic. That looks interesting. Here's a card. Wait, is that the same? I need to check to see if this is the same game as we looked at before. No, this is a different game. Not gonna lie, I think he just played a boring endgame in that one, so we're not gonna look at that. This one, however, Danya is playing a Sicilian, so I think that's going to be rather interesting, don't you guys? Alright, let's load it in. Remember, if you have any suggestions, please let me know in the chat. Happy to go over them. Alright. Pawn e4. Pawn c5. Danya goes for the Sicilian, which he so loved. Knight f3, d6, d4, take, knight f6, knight c3, a6. He goes for the Najdorf. I'm not going to pretend to understand all of the theory or anything like that. So we have pawn to g3. Okay. Pawn e5. Very aggressive from Danya. I think the phrase Danya used that had the biggest influence on me was his Sam Shanklin question. Yeah, is that the one where it's like if the opponent is trying to prevent a move and it looks impossible, what happens if you just play the impossible looking move anyway? I'm a big fan of that one. Big fan of that one. So knight b3, bishop e7. Black has this weak d6 pawn, and there's this hole on the d5 square that white would love to fill. But I guess black will try and be aggressive to make up for it. So castles, b5. The aggression begins. a5, b4, knight d5, queen d5. Rook a7, preparing bishop b7, I would assume. Very interesting. Bishop e3 hitting the rook. Bishop e6 counter-attacking the queen, so the queen has to move. What? Poplavsk. My name isn't Daniel. But yeah. My name is Alex. Yeah, Clay. I think that a lot of people remember that quote. It is a great quote. So rook b7, supporting the pawn. Defending a move just for the opponent to play it anyway is the ultimate disrespect. Yeah, and if the move can be played anyway, if the opponent's trying really hard to stop it, if it can be played, it's very likely going to be a very good move. I need to take a phone call quickly. Apologies. My car is in the garage, and the mechanic was just calling me about it. I had to get a couple new parts for it, and I was praying to God that they'd fit, and that I wouldn't have to get a new part because the MOT needs to be done today. Anyway, I've got to get the front tires changed as well. But I trust the guy. He's a very nice guy. Big fan of him. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for sticking around, guys. Sorry, I just had to take that call. Yeah, Hakai, we're just not going to speculate. We don't know yet. We don't know. And if anyone says they know, and they're not, a verifiable source, then they probably don't. So let's just not speculate. It's not relevant. It's not relevant right now. What is relevant is looking at some cool games that Danya played. Okay. Danya kept saying instead of physically preventing a move, you can try to remove the sting out of the move. That makes a lot of sense. So pawn a5. And pawn a5 is a very important move. Because let's say you go, I don't know, rook fd1, which is also fine. If black can play a5, then the b4 pawn is quite strong. But by white playing a5, it makes b4 rather difficult to defend, right? Also, maybe a6 could be a weakness. And that's a very classic positional move. So a5, knight d7, rook fd1, applying pressure to d6. But the bishop is defending it fine for now. Queen c7, applying pressure on the c file. It's very hard for white to defend the c pawn because you'd want to put it on c3, but you obviously can't because of this. And then all of this opens up, and that's horrible. Also, the knight just hangs for now. So queen c7, f4. White attacks on the king side. Knight to f6, unfazed. I'm not sure exactly what the knight's doing, but I think it's just applying pressure. Pawn f5, bishop c4. Very nice square for the bishop. Very, very nice. And it's hard for this bishop to try to trade because e4 hangs, right? So you see the point of the knight on f6. And maybe the knight comes to g4 to harass this bishop in the future. Bishop b6, though, hitting the queen. Queen back to c8. d6 is defended. And in this position, white goes knight c1. The engine wants white to be brave and take on b4. That's a very scary move because d5, right? Discover attack on the queen. And after the queen moves to c3, let's say, engine likes knight e4, hitting the queen. White has to give up his light-squared bishop, which is normally a no-no, considering he's got a fianchetto setup. And after queen e5, rook e8, I mean, white is up a pawn, but these bishops are probably going to come alive rather nicely, and the queenside pawns could be a problem. Also, f5 could hang. So his opponent doesn't go for it. He goes knight back to c1. Maybe preparing b3. Pawn d5 anyway. If in the Sicilian, the general rule of thumb, I mean, I don't play the Sicilian, right? But the general rule of thumb is if you can go d5, you're probably better with black. And Danya goes d5. Now, what happens if this is taken? e4 is the move, cutting the bishop off from the defense of the pawn. So if white does nothing, you just scoop up the pawn, I assume. Or knight takes, maybe. And then the engine just wants knight back to b3, which, you just move the knight away from b3. So pawn to b3, justifying knight c1, maybe. Bishop back to b5, ed5, rook b6. And you just sacks another exchange. Okay, I'm just picking random games of Danya from his from a database, right, of classical games. Dude just sacrifices like rooks constantly. I mean, he sacrificed a queen in one of the previous games as well. Jeez, alright. So rook b6, brilliant move. A b6, what's the justification? Bishop c5. Right, so removing this bishop from stopping bishop c5. King h1, knight g4. In the Sicilian, if black can play d5, he equalizes. If he can follow up with e4, he's winning. Really? Well, obviously it's a rule of thumb, but okay, I didn't know about the e4 thing. So okay, knight g4, best move, threatening knight to f2. So h3, best move, knight f2. I guess you just can't stop knight f2. Like, there's no good way. Knight d3 isn't going to cut it because you'll just take here. And if queen takes, you're going to lose the queen. And if pawn takes, then I assume you just do this anyway. King moves, and then this comes with discovered check. That's pretty bad, right? So it's kind of an impossible problem for white to solve. So tries his best with pawn to h3, so that now after knight f2, he can give back the exchange. But so okay, 2 rooks have come off the board, a bishop and a knight have come off the board, and after bishop b6, the dust settles a bit. What's the count? Well, material is equal. Black has the bishop pair. Black also has a passed e pawn. White has a passed d pawn. f5 is weak. c2 is weak. These bishops are very, very good. So the engine gives this minus 1.5, even though material is equal. So bishop e4, trying to hold on to the pawns. Queen c3, hitting the rook. Knight goes to a2, hitting the queen and making sure the rook is defended. Queen e3, putting pressure on the bishop. Queen e1 is the only move, trying to defend. Also, queen to f2 could be a problem. So queen e1. Daniel goes for the queen trade. Rook c8, not the best move. Bishop d4 is much better according to the engine. Why? Because knight b4, which wasn't played. Oh, right, yeah, so if bishop d4, knight b4, then there's bishop to c3 with a fork. That makes a lot of sense. So Daniel goes rook c8, giving up the b4 pawn. But after bishop to a5, white has to find c3, rook c3, knight to a6. If bishop takes, then I assume rook a1, and this is fine, because if here there's b4 and take, and this is just going to be a draw. So white would have to find knight a6, and after rook b3, try and hold this position, basically. The only move would be rook to a1, counterattacking. Bishop c3, for example. This is still very difficult. So he goes king g2. Engine hates it. a5. Now the pawn is supported. And now this is going to be very hard for white to play. This knight sucks. So king f3, king f8, rook d1. If this king gets to d6, I would say that white has nothing, basically. Thank you very much, Dude McGivers. Appreciate it. Yeah, it is very, very weird. Very, very weird. So bishop d4. Sacrificing the exchange isn't a sacrifice. It's just a trade, in my opinion. I see what you mean, but like, I don't. It is a sacrifice. It is, because if you get into an endgame where one person, like, let's say you have 4 pawns each. One person has a bishop, one person has a rook. The rook should win that endgame, right? So it is a sacrifice. So rook d2, king comes to e7, knight c1, king comes to d6. So like I said, I think once the king lands on d6, white has no counterplay. This pawn is the counterplay, but now it can't move. And the king is blockading, so that these pieces can go do something else. Like, take all the black pawns, maybe. So rook d1. This bishop is holding on to everything for the time being, but can it continue? Danya plays bishop e2, which is a big move. Because material is equal. Don't forget that. Material is equal. But we have opposite color bishops. So theoretically, this should be a draw. But there are many, many weaknesses in the white position, and the white king isn't all that safe. So g3 is under attack. What happens? Well, I mean, can white defend it? No. There's no king f2, bishop covers. No rook g1, bishop covers. So his opponent tries bishop d3, cutting the rook's connection. If king takes d5 is played, then bishop c4 with double check. Something like king e4, bishop d3. Maybe there's some kind of perpetual, you know. So pawn e4, yeah, lovely, lovely trade. To go into an opposite color bishop endgame like that, you've got to be sure it's winning. And e4, and his opponent resigns. Opponent resigns. Why? Well, if the bishop takes, then you win a bishop. So the bishop can't take the pawn. Okay, so what does the bishop do? If the bishop goes to c4, then, I mean, there's many wins. Rook g3 wins, rook c2 wins. Engine suggests a4, because if takes, the bishop hangs. So let's say g4, I guess you probably just go a3. And this rook is still an absolute monster. This is still weak. This pawn, I mean, how on earth is white ever going to take that? And this pawn is a massive problem. So, yeah, after pawn to e4, I think, yeah, white resigns. That's a very nice endgame. Rook will be able to see the entire board, both color complex and his long range, and knight can see both sides of the board. Its scope and mobility is seriously limited. Yes, absolutely. And obviously a bishop can only see half the squares. Yeah, Dude McGiverson, I would agree with you there. Another very nice game. Another very nice game. They don't stop, do they? They don't stop. Let's see if we can find another one. I don't think it's going to be too difficult because there are endless nice games. I'm just trying not to use blitz and bullet games. I'm trying to find classical games because, I don't know, they're just of a much higher quality. Typically, anyway. What's this? Again, any suggestions, let me know. Okay, this is interesting. This is a tournament from 2020. Yeah, 2020. An online classical tournament, I think. Oh, a game against Robert Hess. That'll be good. That'll be good. Game against Robert Hess. Yes, please. Yes, please. Yeah, his analysis of endgames was really, really good. Really good. Alright then. Let's jump into it. Robert Hess versus Danya. Of course, we have a Sicilian. And we have a delayed Alapin. And I sometimes play this with white myself. So we'll see how Danya dismantles it. With d5, very principled. E takes, d4. Personally, I quite like these positions with white. But we'll see how Danya plays against it. c4. Whoa. c4 is a weird move. Because, yeah, b3. cb3. I think I've had this position before, you know. I thought it was quite comfortable with white, but let's see. Bishop d3. Knight e7. Good move, because I think the knight on f6 is slightly misplaced. But knight e7. Castles. Pawn c4. Now, if black takes on c4, then white is just much, much better. White has an incredible pawn center, and black doesn't have an ED or C pawn. The open A file is also quite useful for white. I'm going to just go refill my water really quickly. One sec. My throat is like dying. All right, I just had some honey as well. Hopefully that helps. Oh, Poplavs, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that, man. You didn't have to do that, but that is much appreciated. Well, thank you for being here, mate. I hope I'm saying your name right as well. Yeah, thank you very much. So, okay. Knight b to c6. And white never really wants to take on d5, because here the structure is really, really bad for white with the isolated d and b pawns. Black will very easily get a passed pawn in the endgame, and this d pawn could be a big, big problem. c4 makes sense in some Tarrasch, Queen's Gambit, arguing that white can't have the semi-open file. Yeah, fair. So Hess goes knight to c3. We have pawn to h6, which I always think is a useful move in these types of positions. Making sure h7 isn't a problem, stopping bishop g5, stopping knight to g5. Makes a lot of sense to me. So pawn c5, forcing the bishop back. Bishop goes to b8. Maybe we see this in the future. I don't know. Rook a4. Rook a4 is a very strange move, but maybe it's just preparing b4, b5. So let's say Daniel does nothing and just shuffles the rook. Yeah, b4. b5 is on the way, and that's going to be trouble. So a5, stopping pawn to b4. Rook e1. This rook is actually pretty well placed as well. Just defending and attacking and pressuring b4. It's a very nice piece. So knight b4. Hitting the bishop. Bishop back to b1. Bishop d7 hitting the rook, forcing the rook back. And then bishop g4 applying pressure to the knight. After h3, bishop h5, we also see the utility of the knight on e7. Because if g4, bishop to g6, and bishop takes, you don't have to take with the pawn. You can take with the knight as well. So the knight is rather useful. But Hess goes knight to a2. You can see, most of Hess's pieces are just on the back rank. They're not that impressive. But these pawns could be a problem in the future, to be fair. a5 might be weak. So Daniel retreats the knight. Very nice move. Very nice move. Just saying, okay, why is your knight on a2? Queen d3. Threatening mate. Bishop g6. The engine here prefers the move f5. But I think that's a very strange move, personally. Just allowing knight e5. That seems really weird. So bishop g6 looks far more natural. Queen to b5. Trying to infiltrate and attack b7. We have queen c7 defending. We have some pressure on h2, although the knight is controlling h2. Bishop b2. Maybe putting a knight on e5 and having the bishop supporting the knight makes sense. Knight to f5. It is really weird knowing there will never be a new speedrun video. Really weird. So knight f5, applying some pressure. Maybe threatening knight h4 ideas to try and distract this knight from defending h2. We have bishop f5. Bishop f5. Daniel wins the bishop pair. Knight comes back into c3, applying some pressure. Knight takes d4. Whoa, knight d4. Okay, forcing knight d4. And not queen h2, because that would be losing, because the bishop's under attack. But bishop d7, the queen supports the bishop hits the queen. That's really sad, dude, McGiverson. That's sad, man. That's rough. I've told my girlfriend many times, and like my mum and my brothers, that I started making YouTube videos because I was inspired by Danya's speedrun. So for that to be gone, weird. Although, like I said earlier, his content is still there. There will be no new content, but all of his content is still there for us to enjoy. So bishop d7, only move, hitting the queen, preparing queen h2. Queen b6 offering a queen trade. Obviously, you have to go for queen h2. Bishop f4. Bishop f4? What? Okay, so the engine here likes bishop h3, which basically forces you to take. And then rook a6, trying to lift the rook with tempo. That's odd. That's odd. He goes bishop f4, which is the second best move. Knight d5, which is a mistake. According to the engine, the only move is knight c to e2, cutting off the king's escape. And after queen h1 check, knight g1, bishop h2, knight f3, rook a6, queen b7. These are all only moves. Bishop c8 only move. Queen d5 only move. Rook g6 only move, threatening this. King e2 only move. Queen g2. And then you have to find bishop d4. I mean, that's an insane sequence. That's an insane sequence. And realistically, even if white gets to this position, would you want the white pieces here? I don't know. I think that's a very hard question. So, Hess takes on d5. Rook a to e8, which is a mistake according to the engine. Queen h1 is the way to go, followed by rook a to e8. What's the difference? Well, the engine says the difference is rook e7. If this check is given, the king can run. That's crazy. But Hess goes knight e7. And after king h7 only move, you can't go to h8. Otherwise... Wait, otherwise what? Oh my god, queen h6 could be a problem if this bishop moves. Oh, so you have to go to h7. So that's not a problem. Queen b7. And then black is winning. The only move is bishop c3. Why? Why? Well, after check king e2, if you take, you're losing after king f3, and you're defending the rook. That's the point. So take and then take. But he takes on b7. Now after queen h1, king e2, rook e7, king f3, same line. Now e1 is hanging. So rook e1, queen e1, queen d7. Danya is up in exchange, but down 2 pawns. Wait, down 2 pawns? No, down 1 pawn. The game is not over. Bishop g5, best move. The white king is stranded. Queen f5. King g8. Queen c2. Rook e8, setting up potential mate threats. The king is just sitting on f3. Just sitting on f3. Pawn g6, kicking the knight. d6. And then where's the win? Rook e... Oh my god, rook e3. He has to sacrifice the rook. He just has to sack the rook, of course. It wouldn't be a Daniel Naroditsky... Oh my god. It wouldn't be a Daniel Naroditsky game without a rook sacrifice. If this is taken, queen e3, king g4, and there's 2 different checkmates, but h5 is probably the prettiest. So, after rook e3, king g4 is the only move. The rook can't be touched. f5 check. The knight has to sacrifice itself. I mean, the king has no moves, so the knight has to sack itself. Rook e4 check, not even taking the knight. King back to f3. Now g takes f5. And Danya is up a rook. Queen d3. Queen d2 offering a queen trade. Queen a6. And then mate in 1. Of course, Hess can't accept the queen trade because he's down a rook. That's a crazy game. That is a crazy game. Highlight of that game? Well, we know what the highlight of that game was. It was, of course, knight takes d4. According to the engine, a mistake. Practically, however, very, very hard to defend. Very hard to defend. That's an awesome game. Another awesome game. And I'm telling you, I'm not even picking out, like, certain games. I'm just picking random games from classical from classical games in the database. That's all I'm doing. They just happen to be awesome. All right, let's see if I can find some from earlier in his career. Let's see, let's see. What interesting ones do we have here? There's a lot of a lot of open tournaments here. Trying to find one in an opening that I think will be fun. We have a Spanish. Okay, Dan, you're on the black side of a Spanish. That'll be nice. In Riga, 2015. Riga 2015. We all know who came from Riga. We all know who came from Riga. Naroditsky versus Mackenzie Molnar. Okay, we can do that next. That was the highlight. I thought it was the rucksack. It got an OMG from you. The rucksack was nice, but I think the Knight Sacrifice was cooler because it was like, I don't know. The Knight Sacrifice was less clean. The Rook Sacrifice, a weird move to find, but once you figure it out, it's kind of obvious. The Knight Sacrifice is like very skeptical, if you know what I mean. I mean, both very cool, but okay. Am I going to put all of these in a video later? I mean, aren't people able to just watch the stream back? Would it matter if I put it in a video later? I mean, I can chop it up a bit if you guys want me to do that. I can do that. Okay. So his opponent opens with e4. We have a Ruy Lopez. a6, bishop a4, and knight f6. I actually used to play e4, e5 with the black pieces, believe it or not. And I used to play this line with black, the Morphy defense. Yes, I actually quite like this. So after rook e1, b5, bishop... Wait, which line is it? Wait, can I remember? I think, is d6 the... No, it's not d6. There's some line, it might be c3, where you offer the marshal. Is it rook e1, castles c3? Something like that. I don't remember. Anyway. b5. Have I covered his game against Priyadarshan? I have not, though. I have not. I'll pin those comments. I'll pin those comments of game suggestions, and we can go over them. Let me pin them. Okay, I can only pin one. Okay, I'll try and remember, though. All right. So b5, bishop b3, castles. Oh, no, sorry. I think it's c3 in this position. And then you can play... There's some martial gambit, which I can't remember for some reason. But anyway, d4. Knight d4. It's been ages since I used to play the Ruy Lopez with black. Take. e5. I think if queen takes, white is just losing, right? Yeah, because c5 and then c4 trapping the bishop. So white has to be careful. So pawn e5. Knight back to e8. Pawn to c3. Pawn to c3? What? So if queen takes... Now if this, then this, right? And white is probably better. Sorry. No. Queen e4. Wait, what am I missing? Oh, so knight c7 doesn't come with tempo. Oh, okay, yeah. Then after rook b8, then you save the bishop. Got ya. So c3, offering the pawn. Daniel doesn't accept it. He plays c5. If takes, which was played, c4. So we have this 3 versus 2 structure on the queen side. Remember that. Endgames, Daniel is probably going to be better in terms of pawn structure because of that 3v2. Unless like big things change elsewhere. So pawn d5, counter-attacking in the center. If en passant is played, then the knight gets back into the game. Probably bishop f5 offering a bishop trade. And black is doing rather well. d4 is quite a weakness. So knight d2, pawn f5. Whoa, pawn f5. If en passant, then I guess knight takes f6. And this is perfectly fine. And that is what happens. Okay, yeah. Take, h3. Stopping anything coming to g4. we can't do anything about it now, man. We can't do anything about it now. It is what it is. So pawn h3, bishop d6. Daniel is significantly better on move 16 in the Spanish. That's really hard to do. So knight to f3. Engine kind of prefers knight f1, but knight f3 is fine. Knight comes to e4, offering a pawn to white, which white doesn't accept. If this is accepted, bishop b7. These bishops are monsters. If the rook goes back to e1, rook f3, sacking the rook, and then queen h4, and this is not going to hold very long. These pieces are just not in the game at all. Clam snail, I feel that, man. So knight e5. Asaf tries to block up the bishop. Bishop b7 supporting the pawn. NG prefers queen h4. Why? I guess g3, queen h3, sure. Rook e2 defending. Then bishop b7. Okay, so after bishop b7, bishop e3. Bishop d5, okay. Blocking this pawn. So the d pawn is going to be a permanent weakness. Queen to d2. Queen to d2. We have queen e7. Rook e2, c1. Queen to e6. So the queen shuffles forwards. Where's it going? Where is it going? Bishop f4. Bishop back to b7. Maybe Daniel's going to turn his attention towards the d pawn. I suppose he's not in a major rush. Bishop back to g3. Rook a to d8. Applying some pressure. The threat, of course, is bishop e5, queen e5, pawn e5, and rook takes d2. Up a full piece. So queen to e3, stepping off of the d file. Bishop back to b8, opening up the rook's attack. Rook to d1, supporting the d pawn. Queen to b6, applying pressure from a different angle. Knight g4, bishop a7, avoiding the trade, keeping the bishop pair, and applying a ton of pressure to d4. The bishop tries to defend. The queen rotates to g6. These bishops are still looking very, very nice. Queen back to e2. And then here the engine suggests the move e3. Sacrificing a pawn. If knight takes e3. Bishop f3. Skewering the queen and the rook because of the pin. Okay. If queen takes e3. h5 and the knight can't move because of mate on g2. And if pawn takes e3, h5, and the knight can't move because of mate. Although the queen is defending because the pawn's out the way. And then rook f5 and the game goes on. Very difficult to judge. But bishop c8 played. Engine doesn't like it, but applying pressure to the knight. King to h2, trying to step off of the g file, allowing bishop g4. If you take with the queen, you're going to be completely losing after takes, and takes on f2. This is not sustainable. Also, this pawn is going to become a monster. So hg4, rook d5. Maybe threatening take, and take. Let's say a random move is played. Yeah, rook e5, de5, and rook takes f2. No, not rook f2. Sorry. Not rook f2. Bishop f2. Oh! The king's in a box. The king is in a box. So g3 would have to be played, and then rook f3. Queen supports the pawn. Pawn supports the rook. Rook supports the bishop. This is coming. Rook d5. f4. Queen h6 check. King g3. King steps forwards. Engine here wants rook e5 anyway. If the d pawn takes, then queen f4 and mate will ensue after something like here, here. And worst case scenario, I mean, you could do this if you really want to. The engine, however, suggests... What on earth? Bishop d4? And then g5. I mean... Oh my god. That's disgusting. Bishop d4 is a brilliant move because you're threatening bishop e5 with checkmate, right? Why are you sacking the bishop, though? Because after g5, mate is coming. Okay, yeah, sure. So why can't you just go g5? Well, then rook h1. Right? And the queen can't come to h4. Now, black is still winning, but not immediately. The point of bishop d4 is you have to take this, otherwise this is going to end the game. And if you take here, then this ends the game, right? So the queen can't move. And after rook takes and g5, there's no rook h1 because it's hanging. You bait the rook to the d4 square? How disgusting is that? How disgusting is that? Okay, well, Daniel doesn't see that, but he finds the same idea of pawn to g5. If rook h1 is played, I assume you take here first. If bishop takes, then queen takes, so king f2. And then the engine likes rook takes d4. And if the queen is taken, then rook d1. Oh my god. Discovered check. The queen can't block because she gets taken. But you have to do that anyway. And, I mean, there's going to be so many different wins here. But that's probably the simplest. But fg5 played. There is a pillar on the g file. Queen g5. Rook f1, offering a rook trade. Daniel accepts, takes, bishop d4, and he is up a pawn, but more importantly, the e-pawn is a monster. The white king is not safe. Rook f8 is a cool move, and Daniel doesn't even accept it. Because if you accept this, then I assume queen f2, king moves, queen takes. Engine thinks that black is winning, but only if he finds king e6, meeting this with this, forcing a queen trade. And again, the 3-on-2 is winning. This is why I said way earlier on, the 3-on-2 is important on the queen side, because endgames will favor Daniel, right? That's why. So king g7, not accepting the rook, but the rook is still hanging. So the rook has to move to f5. Queen d2 offering a queen trade. Again, you can't accept the queen trade, because black is up a pawn, but these pawns suck. And yes, we have the passed pawn, but also we have the 3 versus 2, which is very important. So queen f1. White has to try and fight. Queen d3, and white resigns, because there will be a queen trade. And if queen d3, I mean, taking with anything is fine, but personally, I'd probably play e takes. Because to me, this looks like the easiest option. Like rook f1, d2, rook d1, d4, c3 is on the way. And you see the power of the, well, now 4 versus 2, but the 3 versus 2, basically. It's not so much that black is up a pawn, it's that his pawns are so powerful. So after queen d3, white resigns. Very good game. Very good game. Now, Danya versus Priyadarshan. Priyadarshan. I really hope he's got an easier first name for me to pronounce. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Naroditsky versus Priyadarshan. 2017. Okay, I think this is it. I can't go on chess games because I have a VPN. Okay, let's go on a different one then. Come on. Why can't I have a VPN, bruh? Okay, I'm gonna have to turn it off for a sec, I think. Okay, let me find this. Let me find this. Let's pause. Now will you let me on? No. Do I have to turn off my main VPN? Bruh. Bruh. Alright. Come on. Oh, I'm not even on it. I'm disconnected. It's still not letting me on. Okay, I can't find it then. Apologies. It won't let me on. How does it know I've got a VPN? I don't know. I don't understand all the technology. I just know that I probably should have one. Okay, what if I do this? No, Still no. Okay. All right. Well, unfortunately, I cannot find that game. But what was the other comment? There was another comment with another suggestion. Naroditsky versus Molnar in 2014. Let's see if I can find that. 2014. I think this is it. Is this it? Yes. Yes. Wait. Did that end in a draw? I think that ended in a draw, mate. It doesn't look like that interesting. So I don't know if you meant a different game to that, but okay. I'll find a different one. Sorry, it just doesn't look that good unless I'm looking at the wrong one. Okay. Here, there's one in the Nimzo from 2015. Again, in Riga. I should go to... Riga seems like a cool place. Would you be able to find like a link to it or something? Because if so, I'll happily cover it. Okay, so Danya has the white pieces, and we have a Nimzo Indian with bishop to b4. Pawn to f3, which is a very aggressive system. Very aggressive system. If black castles, I assume e4 is the idea. And d5 and e5. That's a very big explosion. So black immediately goes d5. We have pawn a3, bishop c3, bc3, and c5. We have cd5, ed5, e3. I guess e4 is just too much because, I mean, after takes, if you take, you're probably just lost. After knight e4, queen h4, that's not going to work. So e3. Castles, bishop d3, pawn b6, knight e2, just developing. Black manages to trade off the light square bishops. I guess he just has to be careful because if e4 is executed, white could have a rather nice position. So knight bd7, knight g3, maybe we're coming into f5, rook e8, and bishop to b2. So let's say something like take and take happens and e4 occurs. Like, let's just say for the sake of argument, I don't know, rook c8, e4, take, take. We could have this hanging pawn structure in the center. This isn't the best move because there's knight c5, but let's ignore knight c5. Let's just, I don't know, play h6. Then this bishop could become very, very lively in the future. The rook is going to be nice. The knight is going to come in. And these pawns are going to be very difficult for black to deal with. So we have rook c8. Just getting on the file, which will likely open up. Rook a to e1. The rooks are ready to go. e4 is going to come at some point. Queen c7. Rook e2. Preparing some kind of double up. Knight f8. e4. Not preparing a double up, but one could happen at some point. e4 is here. Knight g6. Queen d2. I guess e5 looks interesting, but then knight to f4. So, yeah. Queen d2 covering knight f4. Knight f4 anyway. Rook e to f2. Danya turns his attention to the f file, because if takes and takes, there's a lot of juicy targets. A half HP T8Q. Yes, I have covered Danya versus Isan Suarez. We did cover that earlier. Would you guys want me to edit this video, this live stream, and cut it into like the separate games and do them as videos? Let me just put a poll out. Give me a sec. All right. Because I know that, you know, sometimes people don't want to watch, like, I don't know, 2-3 hours of a stream. This has been going on for a while. I'm really starting to, have my throat hurting a bit. But okay, so his opponent goes CD4, CD4, knight 6-2 H5, offering a knight trade. Daniel accepts, takes and takes, E5, and this bishop doesn't look amazing right now, which is completely fair. But we'll see if the bishop opens up in the future. Now here, there is one move for black to not lose, and it's G6. Why? What's wrong with, I don't know, Queen C4? Well, the engine gives G4. The knight is simply trapped. The knight is completely trapped. So G6 is forced to give the knight a way out. But G4 is played anyway, kicking the knight back, and F4, F5 is coming. And these rooks are going to be some happy lads. So Queen E7, F5 anyway, GF5, GF5, F6 is the threat. Queen H4, trying to get out of the way. If F6 now, then knight to E6, and black is better. Black is actually better, because he blockades everything. So you got to be careful. Rook F5. Sorry, Rook F4 even. Queen H5. Queen G2. So now F6 is a threat. It would pick up the knight, so you have to go King H8, getting out of the way. This diagonal doesn't seem like it's going to open up, because how are you ever going to move the D pawn? King H1. Rook G8. Queen F2. Maybe preparing to bring the rooks over. Knight to E8. White is in no rush. These pawns are very well protected. Bishop back to C1. Maybe trying to reroute the bishop. Rook G4 offering a rook trade. E6. Here it is. The pawn lands on E6. He commits one of the pawns forwards. What happens if this is taken? There we go. What happens if it's taken? Well, takes. We have some big threats. If the rook goes back to defend, then rook to F8 anyway. Let's say knight G7, trying to keep the rooks together. Rook C8, Rook C8, Queen F8, Rook F8, and Rook F8 is going to be mate. So the knight comes to F6, maybe trying to blockade, protect the rook, and that is the best move. We have Rook G4, Queen G4, Bishop F4, trying to come to E5, and then that bishop will be very powerful. So Knight E4, stopping Bishop to E5 because of F6, and then White would have two hanging pieces. So Queen G1, offering a queen trade, which is the best move. Rook G8, and this is a mistake. The only move according to the engine is H5. Why? Well, if I had to make a guess, I would say it's because the rook has to defend against this pawn. That would be my guess. So let's see. Rook G8, take, H3, Rook G7, F6, E7, and this is clearly winning. A protected passed pawn. The knight can never take, because if the knight takes, Bishop E5, King G7, Rook G1, game over. Because the king can't keep an eye on the bishop. Sorry, the knight. So, yeah, what was wrong with a move like Rook to G8? Well, EF7. Let's say the rook comes here. Bishop E5, and black is getting mated. The black king is not safe. So H5, I think it's actually to give the king the H7 square. Guys, please do not speculate. I do not want speculation. We do not know. We do not know the cause of Danya's death. We don't know. So don't pretend to know. So I think H5 has to be played to give the king a way out. So he eventually goes H5, but now it's too late. Now it's too late. Rook G1, offering a rook trade. If the rook trade is accepted, after take, knight takes, it looks like you're defending, but you're one move too late. Bishop E5. The knight's pinned, and then takes, and promote is going to end the game. So Rook C8, Bishop E5 protecting the pawn. Pawn B5. His opponent tries to create some counterplay. Rook G7, this pawn is going to fall, and after Rook C1, King G2, Rook C2, King F3, Rook back to C8, King F4, black resigns, because, I mean, there's, amongst other things, this is just going to be taken, and then this is probably going to happen. So let's say a5 is played, rook f7, b4, rook f8, game over. If the king tries to stop that, rook g7, king is forced back, f7, and this is not going to be defendable at all. So, very interesting game. You guys do want this cut up into individual videos. I can do that. I can do that if you guys want. Absolutely. Yeah, that might be nice. That might be nice. If I am going to do that though, I don't want to monetize any of them because that feels completely wrong. I'm just going to go to the loo quickly. And if you're not British, that means going to the toilet. I can't do too much more streaming. I can probably do one more game and then I've got to get going, I think. If you guys can send me a link or something to one of the games you want me to cover, please do. Otherwise, I will choose another... Oh my god. Otherwise, I'll choose another game, but I'll be back in a minute. All right, we're back. We're back. Maybe not one vid per game, but like 2 to 3 games per vid. Maybe. I don't know. What do people think? Please let me know. Okay. Operin. Okay, I'll see if I can find that. See if I can find that. Give me a minute. Operin. Naroditsky versus Operin. Ah, there we go. I think that's it. Okay. Download PGN. Okay, I'm not allowed to download the PGN. Okay. Oh, come on. Really? You're not gonna let me download it? Dude. There is no way. Okay, here we go. Found it. Now, will you let me download this one? Download. Awesome. I think I've done it. Yeah, I can do 2 to 3 games per vid if you guys prefer that one. I don't know. Whatever you guys want. I'm not fussed. Alright, so this is from 2014. And in an over-the-board classical game, we have the Alapin, which I started playing the Alapin, which you guys would have noticed on my channel recently, because of Danya. Because of Danya. So knight d5, d4, cd4, knight f3. You can't take this because the knight hangs. So knight c6, cd4, pawn d6, bishop c4. I think I've had this position myself, actually. So bishop to b5, de5, knight e5, bishop d7, knight d7, queen d7. So white has this isolated pawn. But he will try to generate play around it. He does have the bishop pair. This pawn can't be taken, of course, because of the pin. So pawn e6, stopping any pawn d5 ideas. Castles, bishop e7, queen to g4, applying a lot of pressure. Is bishop e7? Yeah, bishop e7 is not a great move. The engine says it's book. How are we still in book? Okay. So queen g4. If castles, which was played, normally the idea is bishop to h6, forcing g6, winning the exchange, except there's bishop to f6, so you can't do that. So Danya takes on c6, bc6. If queen takes, then bishop h6, bishop f6, and what, knight in? No? What's the point? Rook 81. I don't get this. What's the idea? Bishop, say queen back? Yeah, knight e4, right? When he's okay, why can't we go knight e4 immediately? Oh, I got rid of the game. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, let me go back. I don't know why it did that. I'm not sure I actually did that. So after... No, that's not the right game. Sorry. That's the previous one. I don't know why it just got rid. Let's add that again. Okay, so spoilers. So yeah, why not after this and this? Why can't we go? Oh, then the queen takes and defend. Right, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense now. Okay, so you have to start by defending the pawn. Then this is a major idea. Got it. So rook fd8, knight e4, and the threat is clear, just to take the bishop. So queen e7, defending the bishop. The engine suggests bishop d4. Really? Really? I mean, there's bishop g7 for a start. And if takes, you lose. So you have to find f5. Bishop d4, discovered check. fg4, knight f6. King f7, take. And then this is a tough endgame for black with these very weak pawns. So we have queen to e7 instead. I've just got to make a call really quickly. Apologies. It's about my car. The line is busy. Oh, I've got voicemail. Okay, let me listen to the voicemail. You guys can't listen. Give me a sec. What? Okay, I've got to call them back. That was the very strange voicemail. I don't think he realized he was on voicemail. All right. It is definitely not a Ferrari, but we'll see what the bill is when I go get it. But it's ready for me to go get it. It is a Chevy. It's a Chevy, which doesn't really make sense because I'm in England. But honestly, the amount of money I've spent on that car, man, it's ridiculous. It's not even worth it. But I just don't want to get a new one. So all right. Queen e7, supporting the bishop. Rook ac1, applying pressure to the weak c6 pawn, which is very weak. But, d4 is also kind of weak, right? But you can't really take it, because if takes, then rook takes, and mate. So rook ac8. Rook d3. This bishop has been sitting here forever, right? I mean, I'm kind of shocked that king h8 hasn't been played yet, because it would force the bishop to retreat. So I'm a bit confused, to be honest. But rook d5. Bishop back to e3, which is the best move. Rook a5, attacking a2, pawn a3, saving the pawn. Rook b5, attacking b2, pawn b4. And we have a very nice clamp on the c5 square, right? You'd think a5 has to come at some point to try to break apart the pawns. And yeah, there we go. I promise you I didn't see that. Now, I was thinking that if a5 happens, this knight could be a problem. And the engine agrees with d5. The point being that if this is taken, there's rook c8, knight c8, bishop c5, and this bishop is going to be a problem. I was more so thinking that we could maybe take here, and after rook takes d5, maybe the knight is hanging, but there's knight takes. So that was as far as my calculation went. But the engine, yeah, wants d5 for complicated reasons. But Daniel plays the second best move, just defending. a4, which feels horrific to me. I'm not going to lie. I don't understand that move, because this pawn is a weakness, and these pawns are strong, and this clamp is a problem. So I don't really understand that move. It's just a bad move. We'll see what the idea is. But bishop back to e3. c5 will never be played. c6 will be a permanent weakness. Rook d5. Queen back to f3. Maybe we'll try and double the pawns. Pawn h5. We have pawn h3. Pawn e5. If takes, then takes. So rook c5, offering a rook trade. We have knight back to d7. Rook d5. cd5. Knight f6. Knight f6. Queen f5, hitting the rook, hitting e5. Rook e8 looks like the most natural move to me, but after here, here, and here, we see the problem with this a4 move, is that b4 is a monster, and a4 is a weakness. That's the whole issue. Okay, queen e6, takes, de5, knight d7, and f4. Danya is up a pawn. More importantly, he has a very high quality passed pawn on b4. This pawn is okay, but also he could create a second passed pawn if he can get f5 in. So g5, g3. The engine doesn't like g3, but it looks very natural to me. The engine suggests this, sacrificing the pawn and then trying to win it back. That looks very strange to me, but okay. Pawn g3. Rook c2, engine hates because of bishop to d4, which Danya finds, threatening to win the pawn on g5. So takes and takes. And now, like I said, f5 could be an issue if something like takes and e6 happens. So king f7, rook c3 offering a rook trade, also threatening to infiltrate on c7. Black cannot accept. Bishop e3. Rook has to go back to b2. This rook is defending the weaknesses. This bishop defends f4. Rook c7 infiltrating. King e8 trying to defend. Rook c6 attacking. King f7 trying to defend. Bishop d4 hitting the rook. Rook to d2 hitting the bishop. Bishop c3 hitting the rook. Rook to d1 hitting the king. King to f2. d4 trying to counterattack. And here, there's one winning move. There's one winning move. For white. Can you find the win? Can you find the win? Because Danya found the win. I actually don't know. Did he find the win? Yeah, of course he found the win. Rook d6. Hitting the knight. Hitting the pawn. Pinning the pawn to the rook. And the game is almost over. realistically, the game is over. But his opponent plays on. Knight b6. If takes, I mean, this is probably winning for black. Okay, engine says draw, but king e2 is played, hitting the rook. This still can't be taken because the rook still hangs anyway. So rook b1, bishop d4, and white is now up 2 pawns. So knight c4, trying to attack a3. Rook c6 attacking the knight, knight a3. This knight could be cut off. But pawn f5. That's what I was talking about earlier. Pawn f5 could be the key move. And if this is taken, e6. If the king tries to blockade, I assume bishop c5. The king has to move back. And you're not stopping the pawn. So knight b5 hitting the bishop. fe6 with check. King g7. You can't go to e7 because then this comes with check. Bishop c5 anyway, though. And then black sacrifices his rook. e7. Danya doesn't even take. He doesn't even take because of knight to d4. Now, this is still winning, but this is more complicated. And why would you want complication? Here, the only winning move is bishop c5. Because if takes... Is the pin the point? Yeah, of course. If this, then this. And then if take, this is winning only because this is a dark square. If it wasn't a dark square, or if this was a light squared bishop, this would be a draw. Crazy, I know. But pawn e7, rook e4 check, king d3, rook e5, rook c8, and black resigns. The pawn is defended. The pawn will be promoting. If king f7 is played, then rook f8, king gets booted away, and the promotion happens, and this is going to be a win no matter what. I hope you guys enjoyed this stream. I hope you enjoyed looking at some of Danya's games. There are a lot of incredible games, and I hope that you were able to see that over the course of this stream. I will most likely be divvying up this stream into shorter videos, because I know that, you know, a 3-hour stream is a bit off-putting, so people probably want to see some shorter videos, which is absolutely fine. And it's truly tragic. It's truly tragic what happened. I know we all feel it, and I just think that this is one of the best ways to celebrate Danya as a person, as a chess player, as an incredible chess player, as this stream, I think, has shown. Please do not speculate too much. I know it's tempting, and I know that I have, you know, I'm a human. I've been thinking about why. Of course we all have, but we don't know. Don't pretend like you know. Wait until we have verifiable information from official sources. This is not political. This is not a political thing. This is a genuine human being, a great human being who is now gone, and it is tragic, but it is not political. Do not make it so. With that being said, thank you for watching the stream, and yeah, make sure you enjoy all of Danya's content because it's still there. Have a great day.